Hey Dark Case family, how's it going? Today I'm going to bring you a compilation of 10 true crime cases, and I like to think of these compilations as a long sit around the campfire where I can share these stories with you, and you can just sit back and unwind and just immerse yourself in this world that we've built together over the last nearly 3 years. Actually, very nearly 3 years. That's crazy. I think it was August the 7th when I started this channel. Probably should have looked that up before this, but there we go. Today's silly little question isn't really silly at all. I just want to know what you're doing whilst you watch or listen to this video. Let me know down in the comments. These long compilation videos feel, to me, that they feel like they have the same kind of vibe as at the end of the school term or the school year. I don't know, but somehow they feel kind of more casual. And I can't really explain that, but I will stand by that. So come fight me on it. I said what I said. Just imagine that I'm rolling that giant TV into the room, and you're absolutely buzzing that you don't have to do anything for the next 3 hours. Apart from maybe getting a drink, snacks, and just unwinding. Anyway, I understand this is blabbering nonsense. This is why I use scripts. Peace. When Cheryl's friend picked up the phone that morning, she expected to hear laughter, maybe some venting, maybe even some fresh gossip. But the voice on the other end of the phone wasn't Cheryl. What the voice said made her stomach drop. "I wish I could show you what I've done." And then there was silence. Moments later, another phone started ringing, this time belonging to Paul Hussey. He was a quiet man that Cheryl had recently grown close to. He answered the phone to hear a voice that he recognized, but one that he never wanted to hear again. "You're just the man I wanted to speak to. You'll see the point," just like she did. He didn't understand exactly what he meant, not yet at least. But within just minutes, flashing lights filled the street, and inside the house, officers found something that nobody was ready for. Something that would shock a community and destroy a family forever. Before Christopher Hemming dialed 999, he made another call, but this one wasn't to emergency services. It was to one of Cheryl's close friends, and to guarantee that she picked up, he used her phone to do it. The friend later told police that when she answered, she just thought it was Cheryl calling her, but the voice on the other end of the phone was unmistakably male. It was Christopher Hemming. He didn't yell nor cry. He just said, "I wish the camera worked on this phone so I could show you what I've done." That sentence stuck with the friend, and not just because of what it implied, but because of how creepy and detached it sounded. She thought it sounded like he was showing off. I think it sounds like he was acting in a straight-to-DVD movie, if they still exist. The friend later said that she had no idea what to do. The phone call left her frozen. She hung up, and then after a moment, she instinctively called the police herself. She described the phone call from Hemming as strange and really sinister. She didn't know what had happened yet, but she had a good idea that it was bad. She later said, "The tone of his voice, I knew something awful had just happened." The audio of that phone call hasn't ever been released, but police confirm that it did happen, and it happened just minutes before the 999 call.
Hi, I'm not calling for me, I'm calling for my friend. Basically, her ex-boyfriend had her phone, which is they do live together, but it's very unusual, and he phoned me up and gave me like a really strange phone call. Like, he said it was just really sinister. He turned around and he said, "I wish the camera worked on this phone so I could show you what I've done." And then I was there like, "What are you on about?" And he was just there like, "I wish I could show you." And I was there like, "What's your point?" And he was there like, "You'll see my point," like she did.
Just after that, Hemming made another call, one that was even more disturbing. This time it wasn't to just a friend, instead to Cheryl's new partner. The day had started just like a normal Monday. It was November the 11th, 2024. Cheryl's daughter had gone to school, and Cheryl, 44 years old, was alone at home. Well, not quite alone, because she still shared the house on Other Road with her ex, Christopher Hemming. They'd been together since 2010, But things had fallen apart pretty badly earlier that year. They'd separated months before the events of this video, but financial pressures and custody schedules meant that they were still living under the same roof. Friends said that Cheryl was growing increasingly unhappy in the final stretch of the relationship. She'd started seeing someone new, a man named Paul Hussey, someone that she'd first met in the online gaming community years earlier. The two of them had grown close, and then finally met in person, and by the autumn of 2024, it had turned into something more. Cheryl kept this new relationship low-key. She was cautious as she could be whilst living in a house with her ex. But inevitably, Christopher did find out. And that morning, after dropping the children off at school, he came home and went into Cheryl's bedroom. What happened next would only become clear through a 999 call, through forensic evidence, and through the chilling things that Christopher Hemming would say in the hours that followed. He didn't just enter the bedroom to confront her, he also brought a sharp kitchen implement, and by the time Paul Hussey's phone rang, the damage was already done. Paul Hussey had missed the first phone call. He was still waking up when Cheryl's number lit up on his phone. This was just after 9:20 a.m. When he eventually answered, he expected to hear his new love, Cheryl's voice, but instead, he heard Hemming. Paul would later testify that he instantly recognized the voice. There was no confusion on his part, no doubt of who this was. Christopher Hemming did not introduce himself because he didn't have to. Instead, he said, "You're just the man I wanted to speak to." And Paul, confused and half asleep, asked what he meant. That's when Hemming added, "I'd send you a photo, but the camera's broken." Paul replied, "What's your point?" And Hemming delivered a disturbing reply, "You'll see the point, just like she did." And then the line went dead. Paul sat there, stunned. The words hadn't fully made sense at the time, but he believed that there was something final about them, something strangely aggressive, intentionally cruel. Moments later, Paul tried calling back, but there was no answer on Cheryl's phone. Instead, he moved on to sending text messages, but he got no reply. It wouldn't be long before police arrived at the house on Other Road and began piecing together exactly what had happened, and this included those bizarre phone calls. Hemming cruelly used Cheryl's phone to call the man that she'd been dating. He did this just to taunt him, just to drive home what he'd done. Police described this as sadistic, a moment of calculated emotional harm that followed a brutal physical act. And it was only then, after he'd heard the people close to Cheryl, that Christopher Hemming called 999. By the time Cheryl's time came to an end, she and Christopher had been together for over a decade. They met back in 2010, and for a while friends said that they seemed stable. They had a home together, they raised their children, and they shared a good life in Redditch. But behind closed doors, things weren't that simple. Cheryl was trying to move on. After she reconnected with Paul Hussey, he became a source of support. And then, as we know, something more. Friends noticed that Cheryl was growing happier again. Her life was on the up, but she just couldn't tell many people why. She tried to keep her new relationship quiet, perhaps to avoid confrontation, or perhaps she knew how Christopher would react. In court, it was revealed that Hemming had grown increasingly possessive. He believed that Cheryl was cheating on him. This is despite their relationship having formally ended months earlier. Prosecutor Mark Haywood said, "The prosecution's case is simple. Mr. Hemming could not bear to see Cheryl being happy with someone else. It was, tragically, a case of, if I can't have her, no one can." On the day of the murder, Hemming had just returned from the school run. He then entered the bedroom with the sharp implement, and over the next few minutes, Cheryl suffered 13 sharp impacts. 3 of them would have been enough to end her time on their own. In fact, it was so ferocious that the weapon snapped, and then he started making the calls. By the time he'd eventually called 999, it was 9:30 a.m. The dispatcher answered. This is that call.
Hello, caller.
Hi, I'd like to report a murder.
Okay, caller, where are you?
Other Road.
Your name, please?
My name's Chris Hemming.
Just talk me through what's happened.
I've killed my ex-partner. I stabbed her to death in the bed.
Where is the weapon you've used?
It's in the bedroom, so it broke.
What, is it a knife?
Yes. She grabbed onto it and it just snapped. It's only a porcelain knife, it's not a metal knife.
How long ago did you do this?
5 minutes ago.
Okay, and you're sure she's not still breathing?
No, she's dead.
What's her name?
Cheryl McKenna.
Chris, just talk me through what happened. How did this happen? How did it get to this point?
Because she's been lying and cheating and f***ing other men. I confronted her. She tried to deny it. I'd already seen the evidence. And I simply killed her. She was the woman who killed her. Can you hear them, yeah?
Yeah, I can hear the officers. Just stay on the line till I know they're there in the house with you, okay?
His tone throughout the call was eerily flat, and I don't know about you, but I couldn't hear any remorse. He just sounded kind of tired. He didn't try to run or hide. Instead, he stayed on the phone as the sound of sirens closed in, and as police officers stormed into the house, the line remained open. Bodycam footage released later shows police entering the home. Hemming is just standing there. He's still holding Cheryl's phone. He offers no resistance, and he is immediately arrested on suspicion of murder. That footage would later become a critical part of the case, and not necessarily because it captured any crime, but because it captured his lack of emotion and reaction. This is all available footage.
Hands, please. Okay, drop the phone, show me your hands, show me your hands. Put your hands against the wall for me. Okay, right. Shit, go on.
I'll be on back.
Just, you go in, I'll hold him. Okay.
You got him in?
Just let me know. Okay. Chris, at this time you're under arrest for murder. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, something you later on in court, anything you do say may be given in evidence, all right?
Did it go in the back of this van, mate? Okay. Just going to shut this, okay? You all right? Yeah.
DCI Gareth Loafer later described the arrest as one of the most chilling scenes I've ever seen. He didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He just stood there, calmly covered in blood. From the beginning of this case, Hemming admitted to the attack. He admitted it to the friend. He admitted it to Paul. And he admitted it to the 999 operator. He even admitted it to the police during his first interview. But then when it came time to stand trial, he suddenly changed direction. He now pled not guilty to murder. He instead offered a plea of manslaughter. The courtroom was stunned. Prosecutors who had the audio, the body cam, the forensic evidence, all of this damning on its own, were now forced to go to trial. The jury heard the 999 call in full. They saw the footage. They read the text messages from Cheryl. They heard from Paul Hussey. And they heard from Cheryl's other friend. And then, on the 5th day of the trial, Hemming folded. He changed his plea to not guilty of murder. Whether it was pressure, inevitability, strategy, or guilt, he never gave a reason. Cheryl's family in a written statement said, "Cheryl was a huge and integral part of our family and will be missed terribly as a mother, daughter, sister, and aunt." Detective Chief Inspector Gareth Loafer stood outside the court and said, "This was a purely evil crime. Hemming is a dangerous and manipulative individual who has no remorse whatsoever. He couldn't bear to see her happy without him, so he made sure that no one else ever would." On July the 21st, 2025, the courtroom was silent as a judge passed sentence, the weight of finality pressing down on the room. Christopher Hemming was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years and 117 days. That's the minimum that Hemming must serve, a life sentence by law, but one that Cheryl's family called not nearly long enough. There was no statement, apology or final words from Christopher Hemming. He just stood motionless in the dock, just as he had in the body cam footage, and just like he was during the 999 call. The judge acknowledged Hemming's late guilty plea, but they made it clear that it carried little weight against the facts. This was not a moment of passion. It was a deliberate act by a man who could not accept that his control had ended. Outside court, officers and relatives gathered quietly. One family member held a framed photo of Cheryl. She was smiling with her children in better times. The press asked if anyone would like to speak, but they chose not to. They'd already said all they needed to in every call, every quote, every moment that they were forced to relive, and all because one man just couldn't let go. The words of father and husband, John Hunt. My name is John Hunt, and I am blessed to be Carol's husband, and Hannah, Louise, and Amy's dad. When I challenge myself about how you were able to deceive us all, I simply say that you are a psychopath who, for the duration of your time together with Louise, was able to disguise yourself as an ordinary human being. You reserved your best make-believe version of yourself for the times you were in our house. You managed to maintain that veneer of decency throughout the first year of your time with Louise, but you couldn't maintain it in the early part of 2024. The screams of hell, Kyle, I can hear them faintly now. The red carpet will come out for you. At that point, when the person you could have been meets the person that you are, you will realize your miserable fate will last for eternity. Louise Hunt, 25, was a dog groomer running her own business out of her family's garden pod. She was described as independent, warm and driven. Kyle Clifford, then 24, was an ex-soldier who had recently left the military after a short stint. He presented himself as disciplined, reserved, as well as emotionally open, if only to Louise. At first, the relationship seemed stable, but within months, red flags had started to flicker. Friends noticed that he could be controlling. Louise even confided in one of them that Kyle had a nasty temper. She told another that being with him was sucking the life out of me. He was possessive yet also distant. He was jealous yet flirtatious with others. Behind Louise's back, Kyle signed up for dating apps like Hinge and Bumble. He would lie to her about other women. He would hide conversations with them, and when confronted about this, he would just deflect or lash out. Louise began to distance herself. She asked him for space, but Kyle didn't take this well. By June of 2024, after 18 draining months, Louise decided to officially end the relationship. Her message was kind but final. It read, I'm sorry, Kyle, but I feel I can't continue with what we have. I feel like it has been broken, and I can't ignore how I've been feeling. Take care of yourself always, please. That was on June the 26th, and within just hours, Kyle was online and deep down a rabbit hole. He was trying to buy something that could destroy an entire family and derail the community that surrounded them. Louise's family had never fully trusted Kyle. Her sister Hannah described him as arrogant and rude. Their mother Carol saw immaturity behind his polite facade. And though none of them ever imagined exactly what he was capable of, they knew instinctively that something wasn't right. Still, because of who they were kind to him. He'd even spent Christmas with them. Carol welcomed him in like a son-in-law. But behind the scenes, Louise was making notes in her phone about Kyle's behaviour. She wrote that he was racist, that he'd made hostile comments about transgender people, and that he'd used language that belittled and demeaned her. These weren't just petty relationship complaints, they were signs of emotional control and ideological hatred. But Louise, like many people in toxic relationships, didn't feel immediately unsafe herself. Instead, she just felt drained by it all. After the breakup, her family was generally relieved. Her sister Amy later said he simply failed to be the person that she needed. But Louise still offered him grace. She agreed to let him return some of her things on the 9th of July. She agreed to see him. She believed that he had accepted the ending like an adult. Mother Carol believed that too. She opened the front door for him that afternoon. She greeted him with compassion, much in the same way that she always had. This breakup may have triggered something within Kyle, but it seems clear that these dark ideologies were already within him, insidious thoughts that were just waiting to be ignited into a raging fire. However, what he would do was not just a spontaneous act of rage, it was methodical, cold and calculated. On the 30th of June, just days after Louise told him that it was over, Kyle's online research had led him into the world of crossbows. He settled on a model costing £350, complete with 6 bolts and a cocking device. But he didn't just leave it at that. He had a lot more to his plan, and that would mean that he needed to purchase some accessories as well. He bought duct tape, rope, a specialist butchering knife, 2 petrol cans, and perhaps most chillingly, an air pistol. However, that would not arrive in time for him to include it in his plans. Kyle also researched how alcohol could be used as an accelerant in a fire. During this time, he also wrote a note in his phone addressed to myself, reading, "Nothing I can think of can make me happy. I know I could have gone to therapy, found faith and become a better person, but I just simply don't want to." Kyle also searched horse racing today. Investigators believe that he wanted to confirm whether John Hunt, Louise's father, and a BBC racing commentator would be at work on that afternoon. John Hunt is a familiar voice to millions as a veteran BBC horse racing commentator. He's highly respected and dedicated to his field, but he's even more devoted to his role at home. He and his wife Carol had built a warm, tight-knit family in Bushey, Hertfordshire, raising their 3 daughters, Hannah, Louise and Amy. Carol, 61, was the quiet backbone of the household. She was compassionate, perceptive and deeply protective of her children. Hannah, 28, was a beautician, known for her strength and fierce loyalty, especially to her younger sister, Louise. At 25, Louise was a bright and independent dog groomer. Amy, the eldest daughter, lived away from the family home, but she remained closely bonded with her parents and sisters. And altogether, the Hunts were the kind of family who showed up for one another at birthdays, on holidays, or just a regular Tuesday night. They were united by their love, humour, and the simple joy of just being together. I can imagine that once your family reach a certain level of comfort, it could feel like you're protected from some bad things ever happening. And it's that contrast between the family's daily life and the events of this video that really do make the whole thing seem even more horrifying. By the 9th of July, the plan was fully in motion. Kyle placed the crossbow beneath a blanket in his car. He dressed casually. He carried himself with a quiet determination, and he arrived at the Hunt family's quiet cul-de-sac in Bushey at 2:32 p.m. Louise was working in a pod in the garden, dog grooming, and she was unaware that Kyle was already inside the house, waiting. Carol had answered the door to Kyle at just after 2:30 p.m. She smiled and welcomed him in. But just seconds after that door closed, a faint scream was captured on the family's home security system. Kyle had jabbed at her repeatedly, in the hands, the knees, the back and the chest. She never really stood a chance. And then silence fell over the home once more, and he waited. At 3:07 p.m, he returned to his car and retrieved the crossbow. He then re-entered the home, and remained there, silent and hidden. An hour later, Louise left the pod in the garden and entered the home through the patio doors. Inside, Kyle ambushed her. He taped her ankles and wrists. He restrained her and disgustingly violated her. This ordeal lasted nearly 3 hours. And as if that wasn't calculated enough, he even used Louise's phone to message Father John. "What time are you home?" he typed. John Hunt replied, "Late, I'm afraid. Everything okay, sweetness?" At 6:50 p.m, Hannah returned from work. She was still in her beautician's uniform as she walked into the family home. She called out as she always would. There was a pause, and then she sent a text message to her boyfriend, Alex Klein. It read, "Call police, immediately. To mine, now. Kyle here. Police, now. He's tying us up." Just 2 minutes later, Hannah was struck by one of the bolts from behind, and even though she was now mortally wounded, she somehow managed to dial 999 and tell the operator exactly who had done this. Police arrived just minutes later. By this time, Carol and Louise were already gone, and Hannah's time on this earth came to an end shortly after. Police found 3 vodka bottles on a sideboard in the home, likely a failed or abandoned attempt to destroy evidence. Kyle Clifford was already gone. He disappeared out into the world once more. It's hard to overstate what Hannah Hunt actually accomplished in her final moments. She came home expecting a normal evening. Instead, though, she walked into a nightmare. Just seconds after stepping inside, she recognized the danger and she acted. Her voice, recorded on a home security device, was clear. "Kyle, I swear to God." Then the rapid clicks of her phone, the short, urgent, precise text message sent to Alex. And it was that message, along with the 999 call, that would save lives. Because of Hannah, police were dispatched with clarity of the situation. They knew who they were looking for. They knew that he was armed with a crossbow, and they knew that he probably had every intention of doing this again. Detectives later said that Hannah's actions prevented a 4th victim, her father, John, and John agrees. In court, through tears, he said, "I firmly believe that had she not shown such amazing physical and mental strength, I would have been the 4th victim that day."
Well, about 7 o'clock last night, the whole place went crackers. There was loads of police cars turned up. There was police out here in black outfits with and all the rest of it, all in the street here. And literally there was just police cars all down here, all over there. And there was ambulance, there was people in pink stuff, they all went down, and there was everything going on. It was amazing. And then with noise upstairs, you know, I think the helicopters and everything just started. It just happened all of a sudden. It just went like it was an explosion. Everything happened. And that's all I can say. And they locked off the street and they stopped everybody getting through. And as far as I know, it's always a very quiet area here. Nothing ever goes on here. It's very unusual. It's very, very peaceful and very quiet.
The family's neighbours left stunned that something so terrible could have happened just yards away.
It's horrific. I have to go to work. we have to do our day-to-day job. But it does affect you, and it's at the back of your mind. You know, it's right on your doorstep.
She's told to go inside there because there might be a man on the loose there with a crossbow. So we all went upstairs and kept on popping our head like most of the neighbours there through the windows kind of thing there, so a bit of window watching.
I mean, what was that like on a normal evening, being told there's a man with a crossbow nearby?
It's unnerving.
After fleeing the Hunts' home, Kyle Clifford made it nearly 20 miles north to Lavender Hill Cemetery in Enfield. There, sometime after 10 p.m, he aimed that same crossbow at himself, and he fired. This would not have the intended result, and he would live on. However, he was now paralysed from the chest down.
This evening there was major police activity at a cemetery in the Enfield area. Armed police and an emergency helicopter involved. The scale of it all, testament to the fact that finding the alleged triple killer had become a national police priority.
For the next 10 weeks, Kyle remained in hospital under round-the-clock police guard. Only then was he deemed fit for interview. When detectives finally sat down with him, they got nothing. He stuck with the incredibly annoying no comment in interview. There would be no explanation and no apology. However, privately, early on in his treatment, he had muttered, "What I've done is atrocious." But in formal interviews, he maintained his silence. When questioned about the note on his phone that was addressed to myself, Kyle appeared to choke up, but he still refused to elaborate. The note read in part, "Please don't think of this as me throwing my life away. I know you'll all have so many questions and wish that you could have done something different to prevent this. However, none of you have failed."
The next note is addressed to myself. I don't want to live my life without her. I don't want to experience new things. Nothing I can think of can make me happy. I know I could have gone to therapy, found faith, and become a new, better person, but I just simply don't want to. I'm so sorry I didn't wait to move on and find my future wife, have the children I always wanted. What do you mean by that?
No comment.
Explain to me why you decided to deprive Hannah and Louise of that privilege.
No comment.
What gave you the right to do that?
No comment.
What gave you the right to deprive Carol of seeing her future grandchildren?
No comment.
It's a very self-centred note and doesn't take into account anybody else. Do you agree with that?
No comment.
There's no apology to the Hunt family, is there?
No comment.
The only apology is to yourself. It wasn't a crime of passion. It wasn't a loss of control. You didn't go to the address and all of a sudden form this intent to kill Carol, kill Louise, kill Hannah. You'd gone there with that sole intention in mind.
Detectives pressed him. Had he already planned the murders when he wrote this note? He just whispered once more, no comment.
Do you accept, Kyle, that based on the evidence, that this is a premeditated murder of 3 people?
No comment.
Do you accept that you have meticulously planned this murder from the moment that you split up the Louise?
No comment.
Kyle Clifford never testified in court. He refused to appear for the violations against Louise, and he declined to attend his own sentencing. In his absence, the Hunt family faced his actions for him. John and Amy stood before the judge and the public to say what needed to be said. Amy, through tears, told the courtroom, "What you did to my baby sister is nothing short of demonic. You earned your place in hell."
Just the most loveliest human being. She was just so supportive and, yeah, just an amazing person.
Mia Grono-Marty was best friends with Louise Hunt. They were about to go on holiday together. Instead, she's now grieving.
What made her so special?
She would just never say a bad word about anyone, and she was just so understanding of just any kind of situation, just such a nice person. I just don't think I've ever met just such a nice person, ever. And I just, obviously just not good.
You first killed Carol, the judge began, who even on that day showed you nothing but kindness in the moments before you attacked her. He then turned to Louise. You violated and killed her, she said. She had been as gentle as she could in ending her relationship with you after your arrogance and anger proved too much for her to stand. And then, the judge continued, you murdered Hannah, who had done nothing to harm you other than protect her sister. The courtroom remained silent as the judge described Kyle as a man soaked in self-pity and consumed by violent misogyny. A man who held women in utter contempt, he said. A man who believed his fragile ego was worth more than their lives. The judge called Louise, Hannah and Carol examples of gentle heroism, women who had lived with kindness and courage, and whose bravery, particularly in their final moments, may well have saved others. But of course, Kyle Clifford wasn't there to hear any of this. He refused to attend the sentencing, just as he'd refused to face the trial or give evidence. But it didn't truly matter. Those words were for the family, for John and Amy, who stood arm in arm as the sentence was passed, for the police and detectives who worked tirelessly to bring the case to trial, and for the memory of 3 women, Carol, Louise and Hannah, whose lives were ended by a man unworthy of the humanity that they had shown him.
There may be cases where a guilty plea should lead the court to draw back from imposing a whole life order. I have considered and rejected that course, as the factors in favour of such an order are so compelling that they far outweigh all those pieces of mitigation. I am left in no doubt that this is the sentence I must impose. The sentences I pass are, therefore, for possession of an offensive weapon, the crossbow, 1 year's imprisonment concurrent. For the possession of an offensive weapon, 1 year's imprisonment concurrent. For the murder of Carol Hunt, life imprisonment with a whole life order. The early release provisions are not to apply. For the false imprisonment of Louise Hunt, 8 years imprisonment concurrent. For the rape of Louise Hunt, 20 years imprisonment concurrent. For the murder of Louise Hunt, life imprisonment with a whole life order. The early release provisions are not to apply. For the murder of Hannah Hunt, life imprisonment with a whole life order. The early release provisions are not to apply.
On the day of the sentencing, Mr. Justice Benathan broke from tradition. He opened not with a summary of the case, but with the punishment. To spare the family any further suspense, he delivered 3 whole life orders. 3 lives stolen, 3 lives that Kyle Clifford would pay for until his last breath. He will never see freedom, ever again. The barrel was wedged between gnarled branches on the riverbank, half submerged, camouflaged by bushland, and almost missed entirely. It had taken 5 days of searching, over 100 police and volunteers, and a digital trail of surveillance footage and GPS pings to lead investigators here to this remote stretch of the Colo River in New South Wales. Inside the barrel was a small, frail body, barefoot, wrapped in plastic. The last time she was seen was smiling in Christmas photos, but now the only thing identifying her was a pink top and black skirt soaked through. As the news broke, her mother collapsed in hospital. Her mother's fiance, who had helped to report her missing, was now suddenly missing himself too. And as police worked backwards through the chaos of that summer week, one question echoed louder than any other. How does a little girl, spending Christmas with her mum, end up in a barrel an hour from home? And why wasn't anyone looking for her?
Another day in a desperate search for a little girl. Heavy fog clouded the tough terrain, clearing just as crews again set off to find 9-year-old Charlise Mutten.
Police have grave concerns for her safety. We are thankful that the weather has been kind to us over the last few days, and we believe that the weather would be sufficient for her to be able to survive this time in the bush.
In Mount Wilson, where police have been told Charlise was last seen, her disappearance has devastated those that live here.
I feel terribly sad for the mother, and I wish that they would find the little girl.
Some discoveries today brought hope of answers as volunteers combed the bush.
See that? Don't walk on the path.
Other items of interest were pulled from the scrub and seized for further investigation as police divers searched water at Windsor, a grim indication they're concerned something very sinister could have happened to Charlise. But there's still no sign of the little girl.
Unfortunately, we haven't led to anything yet that has given us a definite indication of her location.
The sun had already dropped behind the trees when officers reached the river's edge. The GPS data had narrowed it down to a pinpoint location, where someone had spent just minutes at the spot. It didn't make sense at first. There were no tire marks, there was no obvious trail. But then they saw it. A single red barrel, wedged in a gnarled tree. It was rust-streaked, heavy and sealed tight. Inside that barrel, they found Charlise. She was wrapped in plastic and weighed down with sand. The barrel had been filled with 5 20-kilogram bags, purchased from a Bunnings hardware store just days before. Police wouldn't need long to connect the dots. Charlise Mutten hadn't lived with her mother for years. She'd grown up in Coolangatta, Queensland, in the care of her grandparents. This kept her far away from the chaos that had consumed her mother's life. At 9 years old, Charlise was cheerful, smart, and she adored animals. She had dreams of becoming a vet when she grew up. Her teacher said that she was sharp and kind. Her grandfather called her a gentle little soul.
Flowers for the little girl who always had a smile on her face and a kind word to say. On the shores of the Colo River, a shrine has been set up near where police discovered 9-year-old Charlise Mutten's body. As her death sends shockwaves across the country, in her hometown, the community came together, united by the unspeakable tragedy. Little hearts that should be too young to be broken are shattered. The Tweed Heads community overwhelmed by grief.
May her soul fly high as she begins her next journey.
Classmates, teachers, parents, friends and even complete strangers together mourned a world now robbed of the little girl who loved to learn.
Her enthusiasm, positivity and warm, genuine and bubbly personality made our school a much better place.
Lit candles were laid outside the school gates that Charlise should have been walking back through in just a couple of weeks' time.
She was nice, kind, pretty smart. She'd help people if they were sad and stuff.
Just devastated. She made an impact on everybody's life that she touched.
As Charlise's community tries to come to terms with what has happened, her dad has vowed to get answers. In a Facebook post, he said, "We will honour you properly. This is not the end of you or your story, Charlise." Police too are still trying to piece together what happened in the days leading to her death. Almost exactly a week after she was reported missing, they remain at the Mount Wilson property where she was last seen.
That Christmas in 2021, Charlise was invited to Sydney for the school holidays. This would be a chance to see her mum, to finally spend real time with the woman that she still called Mummy. This was the perfect chance to reconnect. Mother Karolina Mutten had served her prison time for a deadly car crash, a crash that took the life of her friend. She said that she was now clean. She said her new fiancé, Justin Steen, had changed too. Charlise was excited. She even asked her grandfather if Justin might become a good dad. So the three of them, Charlise, her mother and Justin, spent Christmas between two places. There was a caravan park near Lower Portland and a luxurious estate in the Blue Mountains called Wildenstein. This was owned by Justin's family. Wildenstein is a wedding venue. It has manicured gardens and winding forest trails. Photos from Christmas Day show Charlise beaming in front of a tree. By all accounts, it seems like she was really very happy, and in the days that followed, her mother would leave her there, alone with Justin. However, this was only going to be for one night, so it didn't seem like a huge deal. In the early hours of January the 13th, a red Holden Colorado Ute slipped out of Mount Wilson with its headlights off. A neighbour would later recall seeing it at 4:30 a.m, coasting almost silently down a road, with a trailer rattling behind it. They couldn't say who was driving it, but what they did remember was the barrel. That ute was towing a boat, and in the tray sat a large red barrel. By the way, if you wonder what a ute is, it's short for utility vehicle, which is like what Australians call pickup trucks. Over the next 12 hours, the vehicle was tracked zigzagging across Western Sydney. It was captured on traffic cameras, on toll gantries and on CCTV. It stopped at boat ramps in Drummoyne, Marsden Park and Windsor.
The 5 Dock boat ramp has become a critical part of this investigation as police look closely at a 2.5-hour window unaccounted for in the accused movements. It's just one of the missing pieces of this puzzle. One they hope the general public might be able to help solve, particularly if anyone saw the vehicle and boat between 7:20 and 9:50 at that ramp on January 13th. At the Windsor boat ramp between 1:30 and 1:40 a.m, January 14th. At the Colo River jetty an hour later between 2:25 and 2:30 a.m, or at Lower Colo Road between 2:37 and 2:46 a.m.
At each location, the driver either hesitated or aborted the launch entirely. Footage also showed the driver purchasing 5 20-kilogram bags from a Bunnings store in Marsden Park. Prosecutors would later argue that intent was clear. The barrel was meant to be sunk. The sand was purchased to weigh the barrel down. At one of those boat ramps, the boat barely touched the water. At another, the driver backed in, paused and then pulled out again. This appeared to be both erratic and indecisive, like this person was panicking. By nightfall on that day, the vehicle turned off the main road and headed north towards the Colo River. It stopped briefly on a remote bush track for just 5 minutes according to GPS, and then it drove away. When investigators reviewed the footage, they noticed something that was impossible to ignore. Before that stop, the red barrel was clearly visible in the tray, but afterwards, it was gone. No witnesses saw the driver's face. No forensic evidence placed anyone sat behind the wheel that day with certainty. The man behind the wheel claimed he had no idea what was inside the barrel until it came loose, and it was then that he panicked, that he decided to dump it. The detectives weren't convinced, because someone had purchased that sand, someone had mapped out the boat ramps, someone had researched that stretch of bushland, and whoever they were, they wanted to make sure that Charlise would never be found again. At least that's what they thought. Going back 2 days to January the 11th, it was only ever meant to be one night. That evening, Charlise was left at the Mount Wilson property, which meant that it was just her and Justin Steen. Mother Callista stayed 90 minutes away at a caravan park. Charlise had reportedly been unwell earlier that morning. In fact, Justin later told police that she'd been vomiting. He said that he gave her some Nurofen to help her. However, toxicology would later prove that that wasn't true. What was found in her system was Seroquel. This is an antipsychotic medication used to treat schizophrenia, and Steen had a prescription of this medication, and even a low adult dose would cause profound sedation in a child. Callista Mutten was many things. She was a convicted substance user. She was a woman who drove under the influence and caused an accident which took the life of her best friend. She was a mother who lost custody of her daughter, but then she got a second chance. But she blew it. In December of 2021, she told her own mother that she wanted Charlise to visit for Christmas. She promised that it would be a clean holiday, just a chance to reconnect. And photos from the early days of that visit did show smiles. It seems that the estranged family could laugh together once again. Charlise looked genuinely happy to be with her mum, but behind the scenes the illicit substances were still being used. During her later testimony, Callista admitted to using methamphetamine during the time that Charlise was visiting. She admitted lying to police about Justin's access to firearms. She even admitted that she had once believed his version of events. In my heart, she said, I believed he was looking out for her. And it was only after her daughter's body was found, dumped in that red barrel, that reality crashed down. Callista collapsed in hospital. She was under medical supervision and was described as difficult to approach when police first tried to question her. And things seemed to escalate for the mother. Later in court, when Steen's lawyer accused her of pulling the trigger, she broke down completely. I didn't even know where she was shot, so now I know, she sobbed. It appears that she truly was a mother in grief, but she was also a mother that had helped create the environment where this was allowed to happen. At one point she told the court that she hated herself for not being there, she said, for losing someone who already loved her unconditionally. There was no evidence that Callista participated in Charlise's demise. There was no physical trace, no witnesses, and no corroboration of Steen's story. But that didn't make her completely innocent either. Her choices put her daughter in the path of a very bad man. And for that she said, I'll never forgive myself. According to forensic evidence, someone pulled the trigger twice whilst aiming at Charlise. Once in the back, probably while she was trying to flee a situation, and once more at close range in the face. The exact time that this happened couldn't be pinpointed, but hemorrhaging in the wound suggested that she was still alive at the time of the first blast. Police believe that this happened on January the 11th or January the 12th. Justin says that Charlise was still alive on the 12th, that they picked Callista up from the caravan park together, that Charlise travelled with them to Sydney. However, no witnesses saw her, no cameras caught a glimpse of her, and no digital footprints supported his version of events. 2 years passed since Charlise was reported missing, and now Justin Steen was standing trial. He pled not guilty to her murder. Instead, he tried to pin it on Callista. From the witness box, Steen told the jury that he hadn't touched Charlise, that he simply heard 2 gunshots outside a shed, that Charlise screamed, "Mummy, no," and when he came out, she was gone. He claimed Callista ordered him to bring a tarp, that she had already put Charlise's body in a barrel, but that he didn't know what was truly inside that barrel when he drove around all day with it in the tray of his ute. "I panicked," he said. "I was trying to protect her." However, investigators had already pulled apart that version of events. On the day that Charlise's body was discovered, Justin's phone had pinged off towers at every key location: the Bunnings hardware store, the boat ramps, and the river. CCTV captured him buying the sand. The red barrel was visibly being towed behind him, and Charlise's mother wasn't there. In fact, no one was. Justin did, however, claim that he vomited when he saw Charlise's body. But in a jailhouse phone call, Justin told his mother that Callista had already warned him that Charlise was on the back of the ute when he was at Bunnings.
From the very first meeting with police, Justin Stein knew he was a suspect.
It's killing me, like I feel like I'm having like a constant panic attack.
He wanted them to believe he was like a father to Charlise Mutten.
That kid really does mean the world to me. She was going to be like my little girl.
But detectives knew he was lying.
Have you been involved in the death of Charlise?
No.
This interview recorded hours after the 9-year-old was reported missing in 2022.
I'm sorry. I need to report my daughter missing.
Callista Mutten had left her daughter in Justin's care at his family's Mount Wilson property.
When was the last time you saw your daughter?
2 nights ago. I wasn't here. My partner was here.
And he'd killed Charlise, shooting her before stuffing her body in a barrel and dumping it near the Colo River. Security cameras tracking him across Sydney with the barrel in his ute. During a 4-week trial, he admitted to disposing her body, but told his mother he was covering for Callista, who he claimed killed her own daughter.
But why were you travelling with a barrel?
Well, I didn't even know. Callista put it on the back of the ute.
Stein was pressed on various versions of his story, and inconsistencies were ultimately made clear when the jury was played his police interviews in the days after Charlise Mutten was reported missing, in which he changed his accounts several times. His main discrepancies centred around the little girl's time of death. In phone recordings played to the court, Stein told his mother that Charlise was shot in the wee hours on January 13, despite him testifying in court that she was shot shortly after 9 p.m. the previous day. The Crown prosecutor argued Stein had changed his version of events after reading a police brief of evidence contradicting his timeline.
On the stand, Steen wept. He dabbed his eyes, his voice cracked, and the judge was watching him very closely. Despite the offender's presentation of distress, she later wrote, he was completely dry-eyed. The court described his testimony as theatre, as a performance, one that revealed not just deception, but also a complete lack of remorse. At the end of the day, Steen was his own only defence witness. No one else came forward to back up his claims. No experts believed him. No character witnesses would stand up for him. Not even Callista, because by then, even she, despite all of her failings, had made one thing heartbreakingly clear. I loved him, she told the court, but I trusted him with my daughter, and that trust put her in harm's way. On June 19, 2024, a jury found Justin Steen guilty of the murder of Charlise Mutten. They rejected every version of his story. The confused timelines didn't make sense. His tearful performance was laughable. What they did believe is what they saw: the red barrel, the sandbags, and the clear and careful planning. All of this was backed up by the CCTV, the river stops, and the obvious lies. And on August 26th, Justice Helen Wilson handed down the sentence. He would get life in prison without parole. This was a shockingly callous crime, the judge said. She described how Charlise was likely trying to escape when Steen decided to pull the trigger. How he then walked up and fired a second shot, hitting her in the face. How he wrapped her small body in plastic. How he weighted it with sand, and then drove across Sydney looking for the perfect place to disappear her. There is no motive that we know of, she said, but the brutality of the act speaks for itself. Steen will never walk free again.
Well, Narelda, there was no emotion from Justin Stein as he learnt that news that he has been sentenced to life imprisonment as a convicted child killer. The 33-year-old has been in custody since January 2022 when he was charged with murdering 9-year-old Charlise Mutten, his then fiancé's daughter, the little girl who'd travelled from Queensland to spend some time with her mum and Stein in the New South Wales Blue Mountains during her Christmas school holidays. We know, of course, that she went missing during that time and her body was eventually found in a barrel by the Colo River. She had been shot twice. Stein has never admitted to his crime and nor has he shown any shred of remorse, as we heard in court today.
Charlise's family, broken by grief, still don't really know what happened. Her grandfather, who had raised her, asked a question that no one could answer. Was she hunted down? Was she pleading for her life? There are some questions we may never be able to answer, but what is certain in this case is that a bright, kind, trusting child spent her final moments terrified, and the man that she trusted most in that moment was someone that never should have been trusted. The walker thought that it was simply a plastic bag. Late afternoon, March 25th, 2023. A quiet stretch of the River Witham near Bassingham. It was the kind of early spring day where the cold still lingers on the breeze. The walker leaned down to nudge the package loose from the reeds, and then he froze. Inside the bag, floating among the weeds and the mud, was something that would leave them requiring therapy. Over the next few hours, police descended onto the riverbank. What they recovered would make national headlines. Wedged in tree roots, drifting downstream. By the end of the search, 224 more horrifying packages had been pulled from the river. These packages made up a 26-year-old woman, a woman named Holly Bramley. She left behind her family, her friends, and her husband Nicholas Metzen, the same man she called her saviour, the same man she posted about on Instagram, writing, "I love this crazy boy with all my heart. No matter what happens, I'll stick by his side." On January the 26th, 2017, Holly Bramley posted a selfie with her boyfriend on Instagram. They were cuddled together under soft lighting. A flower crown filter was placed gently over her hair. "This boy means a lot to me," she wrote. "He's helped me to be who I am. I love him and I don't care what anyone says anymore." At the time, they'd been together for just 3 months. The guy's name was Nicholas Metzen. He was 20 and she was 18. They'd met while studying at Boston College in Lincolnshire, and Holly, kind and gentle, childlike in her optimism, was smitten. From the outside, their early relationship looked like a whirlwind romance. She gushed about how he made her feel so positive, how she felt so safe with him, and how she didn't care what anyone else thought. But even in the glow of new love, there were signs. On February the 4th, Holly posted again. This time it said, "We've had arguments and breaks, but we've come out stronger each time." She talked about how her exes had helped her find the right time for the right guy to take her away. She thanked them in a strange sort of way for leading her towards Nicholas. "I'm in a better position to start my new life," she wrote. "Now I know who wasn't true friends. I can say goodbye and move on." Looking back, her family would say that this was actually the moment that he began cutting her off. Holly had always been close with her siblings, especially her sister Sarah Jane, but suddenly she was getting harder to reach. She wasn't posting the way that she used to. Phone calls now went unanswered, and the girl who loved to sing, laugh, and cuddle with her pets was slowly disappearing. In her place was a new version of Holly, someone who declared unconditional loyalty to a man that it seems she barely knew. A few weeks later, on February the 27th, she posted another message saying, "I love this crazy boy with all my heart. No matter what happens, I'll stick by his side, and he will do the same for me." But, kind of predictably, Nicholas Metzen would not stick by her side. He would eventually lock every door, sever every lifeline, and ensure that no one else could reach her, not even her mother. From the outside, Holly's relationship with Nicholas did seem intense, but it could also be seen as normal. The two of them were young, and yes, they argued, but it seems that they also made up. Behind the scenes though, the dynamic was already shifting, and it seems that it was shifting fast. Holly's family say they noticed it first. She began blocking them on social media for no real reason. Their calls stopped being returned. Their video chats were now cut short, or were heavily monitored by Nicholas. Sometimes Holly would create new Facebook profiles using fake names, just to sneak in a brief message before then disappearing again. Older sister Sarah Jane remembered those moments. We'd have a brief chat, and then the account would be disabled. Nicholas had convinced Holly that he and her were the only ones that mattered, that everyone else was against them. He told her repeatedly that her family was toxic, that her friends just didn't understand them, and that the only safe place in the world was with him. This is known as coercive control, a pattern of manipulation where one person slowly strips away another's independence until they are isolated and completely reliant on their abuser. And in private, there were physical attacks that were escalating too. One of Holly's brothers discovered that Nicholas actually had a conviction for sharing explicit photos of a previous partner. When confronted about it, Nicholas told Holly that he'd only taken the blame to protect someone else, and sadly, she believed him. Around this time though, Holly confided something chilling to her mother. She said that Nicholas had killed her pet hamster. She said he'd used the microwave and a blender. She also said that he'd throttled her puppy. Her family were horrified. They begged her to report it, and she actually did. However, Nicholas convinced her to tell the police that she had done it. The investigation stalled, and no charges were brought. The RSPCA opened 2 separate files on Nicholas, but both were eventually dropped for lack of evidence. However, Annette, Holly's mother, saw it for what it was, a major red flag. We said to her, if he can do that to animals, think of what might happen to you, she later told reporters. By 2020, even Annette was being targeted. Nicholas now began sending her letters, sickeningly taunting her over the demise of another daughter, a daughter that had sadly passed away in a parachuting accident years earlier. He told her that it wasn't a threat but a promise, that she would be joining her soon. Holly's family later said that they had an awful gut feeling, that the animals weren't going to be his final victim, and in the final years of Holly's life, the red flags only multiplied. Nicholas refused to let her work. He told her what she could wear. He controlled what she ate. He even dictated when she could shower. When the pandemic hit in 2020, their isolation would become complete. Nicholas now blocked all outside contact. Her family had no address, no phone number, and there was no way to visit or to intervene. Mother Annette and sister Sarah Jane found out that the couple had actually gotten married, but only after the fact, and through a mutual friend's social media post. There was no announcement and no public wedding photos, although I did manage to find this image during my sleuthing. It was just a quiet civil ceremony, but it now made it even harder for Holly to leave. According to council documents between 2019 and 2023, the couple were repeatedly denied permission to keep pets in the flat. One letter in August of 2020 described how Nicholas had disclosed in writing that he had ended a pet rabbit because voices in his head told him to. But even with things escalating and escalating, still Holly stayed, or perhaps more to the point, she probably felt that she couldn't leave. Holly was known to friends as bubbly, affectionate and kind. She'd studied small animal care at college. Her dream was to become a mother and raise a big family, but chances of this happening were looking less and less likely. By early 2023, the relationship was breaking down even further. It was later confirmed that the couple were on the verge of separating. Holly had now reported incidents. She told friends that she wanted out, but Nicholas saw this coming. and he wasn't about to let her go. On March the 17th, 2023, CCTV showed Holly entering their 14th floor flat at Shuttleworth House in Lincoln. Holly would never be seen alive again. What makes this story even more heartbreaking is that Holly may have finally been ready to escape. In the weeks before she vanished, Holly had reportedly told others that she wanted to leave. She'd confided in her cousin in Australia. She was the last family member that she still had contact with. But then one day, even that cousin messaged sister Sarah Jane and said, "I hope Holly's alright, because he's now made her block me." Inside the flat at Shuttleworth House, something was changing. Maybe Holly had reached her breaking point. Maybe she'd stopped believing his lies. Or maybe Nicholas could simply feel her pulling away. We don't know exactly what triggered him, but we do know that he'd been Googling some very dark things. On his phone, investigators later found searches like, how to get rid of a dead body, what benefits can I get if my wife dies, does God forgive murder? Nicholas then withdrew £50 from Holly's account and sent it to himself. Then he used her phone and her social media accounts to send messages to her friends and family pretending to be her. The messages claimed that she'd left him, that she'd mistreated him, and that she decided to move to Manchester. He was clearly covering his tracks, rewriting the narrative before anyone knew that she was actually gone. But people were suspicious. By March the 24th, someone had contacted the police, reporting concern for Holly's welfare. Officers arrived at Shuttleworth House that same day. Nicholas met them at the door and told them that Holly had left, and that she'd actually gone with a mental health support team days earlier. He even pointed to a bite mark on his forearm, claiming that she'd attacked him. Then, with a straight face, he told police that she might be hiding under the bed. But the flat didn't lie. There was a strong smell of ammonia and bleach, a towel stained with crimson red. There was a used saw. The bathtub was filled with stained sheets, and on the bedroom floor was a dark, soaked-in stain. This was later confirmed to be full of Holly's DNA. Nicholas kept insisting that she just left, but within 24 hours, the truth would begin to float to the surface. Holly's time had in fact come to an end a whole week before the police visited, and since that day, Nicholas had lived among her remains. You see, Holly was already gone. Back on the 17th of March, Nicholas had restrained her in a headlock, and indeed Holly did bite his arm, but this was just in a desperate attempt to get free. In the struggle, he jabbed her at least 4 times, but it was likely more. However, it would become impossible to tell. Nicholas then moved her to the bathroom, and things somehow found a way to get even darker. In the bathtub, he began to dismantle her body. There was seemingly no thought to handing himself in, and no visible sense of remorse. Instead, he did what he did, and then sealed the remains into bags. He then placed those bags in the kitchen larder, and he left them there. A week after the event, in the early hours of March the 25th, CCTV captured him making multiple trips in and out of the lift at Shuttleworth House. He was wearing a rucksack. He carried bags to his yellow Peugeot. However, strangely, he wasn't doing this alone. Earlier that night, he had sent a message to an old school friend, a man named Joshua Hancock. He offered him £100 to help with a job. Hancock, who had learning difficulties and autism, came along, not knowing what he was walking into. What he helped Nicholas to do was to carry those bags filled with body parts. The bags were then dumped in the River Witham. This was 12 miles from the flat. However, this attempt to hide the evidence would not last for long. By the evening of the same day, a walker spotted one of the bags snagged on the riverbank. At first, he thought it was animal remains, perhaps some meat. Until that is, he recognised it as a hand. Police divers then began their search. Once the first bag was found, it didn't take long for the rest to follow. The River Witham became the epicentre of a sprawling forensic operation. Divers combed the murky water. Investigators collected dozens of evidence bags. They recovered an astonishing 224 individual pieces of Holly. Some parts though, including sections of her heart, were missing and never found. And Nicholas Mutten, even though he was now confronted with the undeniable truth, just kept on lying. So I actually found something else while I was editing and I was just looking for a picture. On Nicholas's Facebook page, aka Nick Mutten, he was actually trying to sell his car on the 22nd of March 2023. So I'm guessing he must have known that this car tied him in one way or another, forensically, on CCTV, whatever it may have been. So he was trying to sell the yellow Peugeot that we spoke about for £995 on Facebook Marketplace. I just found that interesting. I hadn't seen that mentioned anywhere else when I've been doing research, but yeah, I think he knew he was in trouble and he had to clean up as quickly as possible. He continued saying that Holly had left on March the 19th, that she had attacked him, pointing out the bite mark on his arm. He said that she was unstable, manipulative and cruel to him. But the evidence in the flat told a whole other story. Detectives found large quantities of bleach and cleaning supplies. They discovered attempts at redecoration. The bathroom showed signs of heavy scrubbing. In the bedroom, investigators lifted the floorboards to find that red DNA had pooled and congealed beneath. But of course, there would be electronic trails too. Google searches, fake messages sent from Holly's accounts, and money transferred to Nicholas from her bank. Police had the CCTV of Nicholas moving bags to his car on March the 25th, as well as a text messages sent to Joshua Hancock, offering the £100 to help him move items in the middle of the night. When confronted, Hancock admitted to what he'd done. He told police that Nicholas hadn't explained the job, but when he realised what was in the bags, he didn't stop. He just went along with it. Yes, for £100. However, let's remember that Joshua was to some degree a vulnerable person, but still a huge mistake. In the months after Holly's time came to an end, her family made a decision. They wouldn't let her story fade into just another forgotten headline. Instead, they launched a campaign called #4Holly. This was in partnership with Lincolnshire Police and the Lincolnshire DV Specialist Service. For 6 weeks, the campaign spotlighted the red flags. Things such as isolation, control, and animal maltreatment. They shared letters, a poem from Holly's mother, and resources for victims still suffering in silence. They also began pushing for Holly's Law, a suggested public register, believing that her end might have been prevented if the red flags regarding animals had been tracked. Their message was clear. If it saves one woman, one mother, one daughter, then Holly's life meant something more than what he took from her. In court, Holly's mother, Annette, looked directly at the man who took her daughter's life. She told him that he had sentenced her entire family to a life of grief. Big sister Sarah Jane added, "You didn't just steal Holly's life in March 2023. You stole her from us years before that." Joshua Hancock, the man who helped move Holly's remains, was jailed for 3 years and 3 months and was placed under a sexual harm prevention order. Some of Holly's remains will never be recovered, and no sentence would ever undo what she suffered. As they continue their campaign for Holly's Law, her family hopes that people will remember her not just as a victim, but as the vibrant young woman who loved animals, adored her siblings, and dreamed of becoming a mother. She was a person before she was a victim, her mother said, and she deserved so much more than what he gave her. Nicholas Mutten was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 19 years and 316 days. There was never a real explanation why he did what he did. He pinned his partner to the floor, then he came back with the can. The man, already partially blind, was still catching his breath when Liam Corcoran pressed the cap and sprayed hairspray straight into his eyes. But he didn't stop there. Furious strikes rained down on his partner as he struggled beneath him. The man would describe their 4-year relationship as like walking on eggshells. Sometimes he would be kind, sometimes he would be cruel, but he would always be unpredictable. I guarantee that you will never guess the trajectory of this story in a million years. So buckle up, because the fasten seatbelt light is on. It was the middle of the summer holidays in 2012. An 11-year-old Liam Corcoran was out shopping with his mum. They were at the Wythenshawe Civic Centre. This is a place just 3 miles from Manchester Airport. The two of them had an argument, and although it may have started over something small, Liam was opinionated and energetic, so what started as a simple disagreement at the swimming pool now spiralled into something much bigger. Liam had slipped away before, but never like this. This time, Mother Mary turned her back, and Liam was just gone. She searched the centre and alerted security. Staff checked the exits, but there was still no sign of Liam. Mary contacted the police and reported her son missing. It would be more than 4 hours before she got a call back, but it wasn't from a local officer. In fact, this person wasn't even in the country. It was from a man over 1,000 miles away. But how on earth had this 11-year-old boy gotten so far and so quickly? This sounds like it could be a case of human trafficking. The man on the other end of the phone told Mary they had her boy, and he was now in Rome. But none of this made any sense, and honestly the story of what happened to Liam is pretty mind-blowing. I don't think I've ever heard of another case like this. Liam's journey to Italy wasn't part of some master plan. In his own words, he just wanted to go to the toilet. After leaving the shopping centre and his mother, he boarded a public bus heading towards Manchester Airport. But he was just 11 years old, so he didn't have any money, nor did he have a real plan. In fact, he didn't even have proper shoes fit for running away. He just had flip-flops, a Spider-Man t-shirt, and a strange and possibly admirable sense of confidence to go it alone. At Terminal 1, Liam did something that, in hindsight, feels almost impossible. He just walked in, and then he kept on walking. Remember, this is in a post-9/11 world, so how on earth did he manage any of this? Security footage later revealed the sequence of events once inside. He joined a group of passengers, including a family, heading towards a lift. Nobody asked him who he was. He passed through the metal detector with no ID, no bags, and no questions asked. I presume that everyone thought that he didn't have bags, because he must be with his parents and his parents must have them. But I guess we'll never know. He was scanned, and his palms were checked for traces of explosives. The staff even smiled at him as he passed through. From there, he found a corridor and then ducked under a barrier. Liam then tailgated behind another family, blending in with parents and kids in the chaos of the summer travel. Nobody stopped him at the gate. He'd made it all the way through the airport. Somehow, Jet2 staff failed to notice that this child had no passport, no boarding card, no tickets, and no adult companion. He simply walked up to the first gate that was boarding. It was flight LS791, and it was bound for Rome. This child simply walked straight onto the plane and sat down. Liam didn't know it, but he just evaded 5 separate layers of airport security. No passport check, no boarding pass scan, no airline head count, no ID confirmation, and not a single adult questioning this child's lone presence. Reminder, he was just 11 years old, and somehow he was now seated on a plane to Italy. But when the doors closed and the aircraft began to taxi, that's when it really all caught up. Liam later said that he'd gone into the plane's toilet and then accidentally locked himself in. He says that he tried the handle, but it just wouldn't open. And then, whoosh, he was airborne. By the time he got out of the restroom and found a seat, the plane was already over France. The cabin crew still hadn't realised that they had let an unaccompanied minor on board the plane. In fact, it wasn't until Liam began talking to nearby passengers, telling them proudly that he'd run away from home, that someone realised that something was actually very, very wrong. A concerned passenger spoke to a flight attendant, and that's when it all started to unravel. The pilot radioed back to Manchester, and air traffic control contacted the local police. And then finally, someone picked up the phone and called Mother Mary. "Your son is safe," they said, "but he's in Rome." Mary thought it was a scam, and I really can't blame her. Her vulnerable, allegedly learning disabled 11-year-old was now in Rome. That sounds impossible, but somehow it was real. And as she tried to wrap her head around it all, officials in both countries scrambled to figure out what to do next. By the time flight LS791 touched down near Rome, the Italian authorities were already waiting. Liam didn't even get to leave the aircraft. He remained on board under the supervision of cabin crew, whilst police and immigration processed the rest of the passengers. He spent nearly 2 hours at the airport with airline staff and Italian officers. They offered him food and drinks. He says he picked up a few Italian words, but mostly the little boy that had run away just wanted to go home. I didn't like it in Rome, he later said. It was too big, too scary. I just wanted to see my mum. By now, the story had already hit British media. The boy who flew to Rome alone without documents had made a mockery of UK border security, and all of this just days before the London Olympics.
Liam Corcoran flew Jet 2 to Rome yesterday afternoon, and nobody knew he was there. Which is surprising, given that Liam is 11 years old and had no money, no passport and no ticket.
We're certainly not proud of what's happened, and that's why we and the airline are doing an investigation. Now, if you think about what's security like at this time of year, there's lots of families travelling on holiday. 11-year-old boy turns up, he's very confident, he's mingled with other families, presented himself to security. At that point, we should have realised he didn't have a boarding card.
What he did have was a knack for evading detection, wandering off from his mum while they were out shopping, and then somehow navigating the 3 miles from Wythenshawe shops to Manchester Airport. Now only the meticulous security checks of an Olympic host nation stood between him and Italy.
Jet 2 rushed to explain the failure. 5 staff members were suspended. The airline reinstated on-board head counts, and Liam, he boarded the return flight that same evening. When the plane landed back in Manchester at around 10:30 p.m, he was escorted off first. His mother was ready and waiting on the tarmac. She burst into tears when she saw him. In the days that followed, Liam Corcoran became a strange sort of celebrity. Newspapers called him Rome Alone, a real-life take on Home Alone but with a weird British twist. TV interviews followed. Photos of him in a Spider-Man t-shirt were everywhere. He was smiling, he was relaxed, and he was now telling reporters that getting on the plane had been easier than doing my homework. But behind the headlines was a very different picture. Liam was not like most 11-year-olds. His parents were separated. He had documented learning difficulties. His mother described him as trusting but vulnerable, and he was known to run away when he got overwhelmed. He'd never even been abroad before that day. Officials quietly noted that something had gone badly wrong, not just with airport protocol, but in how easily a child with complex needs could disappear for nearly an entire day. An investigation into Manchester Airport system was launched.
He's walked up to security. Now, it's very busy, it's the school holidays. He's mingled with a family, or several families actually, and it appears from the CCTV footage it looks like he's part of that party. When you approach security, of course, security is looking principally for any threats, and he's gone through a security process. The thing that's led us down is he hasn't had a boarding card at that point, and that's been missed. We are now investigating that and taking that extremely seriously.
Yeah, apart from the boarding card, there are other opportunities, aren't there, to check ID? I mean, the passport check, for instance. Presumably there were a number of points, including the points at which he got on the plane, where
Absolutely.
he simply wasn't checked.
Security is the first point where you check whether somebody is supposed to be in the area, and clearly he wasn't. Now, once he went straight from security, at no point is he distressed. It's a bit of an adventure for him, obviously. He heads straight to the nearest aircraft that's boarding, which happens to be this Jet 2 flight to Rome. At that point, there should be checks for, does he have a boarding card, does he have a passport that matches the boarding card, does he have a seat, and ultimately the head count on board. All of those checks didn't pick him up. That is also subject to the same major investigation. It's that element where staff have been suspended.
How was it discovered that he was not where he should be? Who finally found out that he was in the wrong place?
Well, we understand from the airline that he was obviously very excitable. He's seen this as a bit of an adventure, and he has been returned safely to his parents. Obviously, we see it very differently, and it is being taken extremely seriously, but he's talking about the experience on board the aircraft. Passengers have heard him, they've reported him to the crew, so by the time the flight landed in Rome, the authorities knew to expect him, and he was given a sympathetic and tasteful welcome, and then brought home. He was reunited with his parents last night.
One spokesperson insisted that, although the breach was serious, Liam had gone through full security screening, and he posed no threat to others. But that really wasn't the point. His mother Mary said it best. How did he get that far without anyone asking him one question? And this was a question that no one could fully answer. Once the news cycles moved on, once the novelty of a child on a plane wore off, so did the public's attention. But Liam didn't just go away. Instead, he grew up quietly out of the spotlight. Until that is 2024. When he made headlines once again, only this time there were no smiles, nobody was joking, there was no Spider-Man t-shirt and flip-flops, just a court summons, and a man describing what it felt like to be pinned to the floor and sprayed in the eyes by his former partner. It happened in Manchester just after a night out. Liam, now 23 years old, had been in a relationship with his partner for 4 years, a man who was partially blind, a man who said that he spent most days walking on eggshells. On the night in question, Liam accused his partner of ruining the evening. It started with a blow to the face outside a takeaway. This caused minimal injuries, but it's still not something to just be ignored. And as well as that physicality, there was also a shouting match, but the disagreement nor the violence ended there. Days later, another disagreement flared up at home. Liam began shouting at their dogs, at which point the victim intervened. Liam then rugby tackled him to the ground and began pounding him with punches. The victim tried to kick free, landing a defensive blow to Liam's face, but Liam would not back down. Instead, he left the room, and when he returned, he was now holding a can of hairspray. He pinned his partner to the bed, and he sprayed him directly into his eye. He was targeting a vulnerability that he knew existed. This was a very personal and premeditated act, an act that the judge would later describe as absolutely atrocious. The next day, the victim found messages on Liam's phone, conversations between Liam and his mother, Mary. In them, Liam admitted to something else. He said he'd used an electric razor to injure his partner during the attack. Police were called, Liam was arrested, and during police interviews, he admitted to both attacks. He claimed that he was mentally unstable at the time, and he then apologised. And in court, he pleaded guilty to 2 charges, assault by beating and assault occasioning actual bodily harm. Liam had no prior convictions, but the magistrate didn't hold back. Let me tell you, the presiding JP said, some of the things you have done during these episodes have been absolutely atrocious. You need to get your life together, young man. You can't be doing this sort of thing. It's a disgrace. You could have permanently blinded him. Liam Corcoran was sentenced to an 18-month community order, and with that he was required to complete 20 days of rehabilitation activity, 200 hours of unpaid work, and £199 in court costs that would be deducted from his benefits. His defence described him as someone in need of support. They said that there were 2 sides to every story, that he had now moved on with a new partner, and he now had a settled address. But for the man left behind, the one he attacked in the most targeted and personal way, those years with Liam still cast a shadow. In a statement, the victim said, I felt abused financially, physically, and mentally over the years. This is the most honest I've been able to be in the last 5 years. I was so afraid. He later retracted the statement. He said that he was worried about Liam's well-being, and just like that, the boy who once stunned the world by flying across Europe without a passport had quietly become just another name in the court system, another case file in Manchester, and let's hope that case file doesn't get any bigger. It's just past midnight in Sydney's central business district. Inside one of the most prestigious schools in the city, police officers move through the darkened corridors of the sports complex. They were sent there on a welfare check, but an unusual one. A man called emergency services from a payphone nearly an hour earlier. He hadn't given his name, just a location and a warning. Someone should find it before the kids do. When officers reached the women's changing rooms, they found a locked door, so they forced it open. The injuries they witnessed were beyond anything they expected, but no one, not her family, her friends, nor the students who so adored her, could possibly imagine who was behind this, because the person responsible was not a stranger. It was someone she knew, someone she trusted, someone who had spent the last few weeks smiling right beside her. But all that time, they had a plan. The school didn't announce the news right away. Parents simply received an email at 4:30 a.m. It said that there had been a critical incident. And then 2 hours later, a follow-up message confirming that no students had been harmed. But that wasn't the full story, not by a long shot. St Andrew's Cathedral School, a 140-year-old private institution in the heart of Sydney, had become the focus of a major police investigation. Its gymnasium and bathroom block were now sealed off. Officers stood silently at the school gates as students in uniform arrived, some with their parents, some alone. Behind the scenes, detectives had already begun reviewing CCTV. They were trying to construct a timeline, matching movements, messages, and that deeply unsettling phone call made just before midnight. A young staff member had vanished during her shift, and now police knew that she hadn't left the school at all. Surveillance footage showed her entering the gym bathroom at around 7 p.m. She was smiling and relaxed, but moments later, a man followed her inside. He then left alone and disappeared into the night. Lily James was everything that you'd want in a coach. She was energetic, kind and focused. She was studying sports business at the University of Technology in Sydney, and in the evening she worked at St Andrews, coaching both water polo and swimming. She also assisted in other after-school programs. At just 21 years old, she already had a strong sense of who she was. She was competitive. She loved team sports and she thrived under pressure. She also had a sharp sense of humour. People who knew her described her as magnetic. Her students really adored her too. Her colleagues all respected her, and her family really was her world. Lily had grown up in a beachside suburb to the south of the city. She was close with her parents, Jamie and Petter, as well as her younger brother. In high school, she competed in dance and swimming competitions. She had the kind of upbringing that most people could only dream of. She didn't just have a surface charm or facade. Lily was genuinely reliable, warm and generous. She'd been looking forward to a weekend away. She had plans. She had people who depended on her, and she really wasn't the kind of person who would just disappear without letting people know. Which is why, when she didn't respond to her text messages on that night, and she didn't come home, her parents grew concerned almost immediately. Her father sent her a message at around 10 p.m, asking her if she needed a lift. Moments later, he received a reply from her phone. "Don't ask why or call. Please come to the school now." This didn't sound like her, and when her father tried calling, there was no answer. So whoever had used her phone must have known exactly what they were doing. They met at work. Both of them were young, sporty and well liked by students. Lily coached swimming and water polo. He coached hockey and cricket. Their schedules often overlapped, especially in the afternoons and evenings. This is when the school's after-hours programs were in full swing. His name was Paul, and by all accounts he was polite, cheerful and dependable. Other staff members said he was a natural with the kids, and one of the good ones. He and Lily started spending more time together in September. At first it was casual, but friends noticed that they really did get along easily. They shared jokes. They were both a little competitive, but in a fun way. And Lily wasn't the kind of person to rush into things. So the fact that she was dating someone new meant that she really trusted him. After all, he fit the mold. He had a good job. He was athletic, friendly, and familiar with the school. Even her parents were aware of him. They had heard Lily mention a nice guy named Paul from work. They hadn't met him yet, but Lily sounded happy. The kind of happy where you start using we instead of I. The kind of happy that makes people sometimes drop their guard. Paul would walk Lily to her car after practice. He would message her good luck before games. And it all just seemed sweet. Even when they broke things off a few weeks later, just 5 weeks after they started seeing each other, no one suspected that anything was actually wrong. After all, sometimes people date briefly and then realise that it's not a match. It happens. Lily didn't seem like it was any huge issue, and she wasn't hiding from him. She had no reason to. In fact, she believed that they were still on good terms. They were still texting. They still worked alongside each other at the school. So if anything was really off, Lily didn't say. If you asked anyone at St Andrews who Paul Tyson was, the answers would have all sounded almost identical. You'd have heard things like bright, well-spoken and popular. He attended the school as a teen, and then returned in his early 20s to work as a coach and activities coordinator. The transition had been seamless. He already knew the staff, he knew the routines and the culture. He seemed confident, responsible and well-grounded. When the school needed help running programs, Paul was always one of the people who stepped up. And even beyond the realms of the campus, he projected stability. He told friends that he was pursuing a master's degree in education. He said that he planned to build a life in Australia. He rarely drank. He didn't really party. And he didn't date around. In fact, one roommate described him as almost boring in how disciplined he was. And this made it even more flattering when he and Lily started seeing one another. From the outside, it looked like a good match. She was warm and ambitious. He seemed calm and mature. However, that was just a version of Paul that he let people see. Because behind that, there were secrets. And soon the cracks would begin to show. It didn't start with shouting. It didn't start with threats. It started with questions. Things like, where are you? Who are you with? When will you be home? And at first it sounded like care or concern. Maybe even an intense affection. He would say things like, I just want to make sure you're safe. Or, I miss you already. Lily was not a naive person. She was confident, experienced and independent. But when you like someone and they seem kind, it can be easy to dismiss the small moments of discomfort, especially if they apologise afterwards, or if they wrap it up in good looks and charm. Paul asked Lily to share her location on Snapchat. It was framed as something cute, something that all couples do, and Lily didn't push back because why should she? She had absolutely nothing to hide. But slowly that attention began turning into pressure. Paul would grow cold if she didn't respond fast enough to his messages. He would sulk if she made plans without him. He always seemed to know where she'd been, and when she tried to draw boundaries, he would act confused, hurt, and offended. To Lily's friends, Paul seemed overly invested, but not outwardly dangerous. Just maybe kind of intense, the kind of guy who falls hard. And Lily had been clear with him. She wanted to take things slowly. She did value her independence, but underneath the politeness and the how was your day messages, Paul was spiraling. He didn't like being left out. He didn't like not having control. And he really didn't like when Lily spent time with other men, especially anyone from her past. The way he saw it, things that he felt were rejections, were not just a personal thing. They were intentionally humiliating. He was now dealing with a loss of control, no longer being in charge of the narrative, nor of the version of himself that he needed others to believe. And to him, that was the worst thing that could happen. During Lily's final weekend, she went to a 21st birthday party. It was nothing unusual, just a fun night out with friends. However, Paul wasn't invited. But someone else was. It was one of Lily's former partners. That night, Paul had dinner with some friends elsewhere in the city. According to those who were there, he barely ate. He spent most of the evening glued to his phone. He was checking Snapchat maps over and over, refreshing and watching. He was trying to see where Lily was at all times. When she left the party, Paul was already waiting nearby. He picked her up and drove her home. But he didn't have much to say. He just stared straight ahead. By this time, something had really shifted. Lily didn't say that she felt scared, but she did mention later that she felt weirded out by Paul. Yes, it was possessiveness, yet it was also something harder to define. A quiet intensity, a building pressure. That Monday, they spoke in person. She told him that she wanted to end things properly, to simply be friends, people that could continue working together professionally. She tried to be respectful, to be clear but kind, and Paul even said that he understood. He agreed to remain civil at work, and for a few days it seemed like everything was okay. He would smile at her on campus, and he still acted normal. But behind that smile, something was brewing. Paul had curated an entire image around being calm, competent, and desirable, and now the woman he was doing it for was walking away, and Paul just couldn't let it go. In Lily's final 3 days, Paul visited her street 7 separate times. He didn't knock on her door, nor did he drop in for a chat. He just sat there in his rented white SUV, parking up at different angles, just watching. Paul took images on his phone of her street. He took photos of cars and made handwritten notes, identifying who those cars belonged to. He was building a map. He was tracking her patterns. And at school, Paul kept his movements equally quiet. He began spending more time in the gym after hours, much more than he needed to. Security footage shows him entering the bathroom area multiple times in the days before the attack, and he wasn't going in to use the restroom. His behavior was weird. He would walk in fast. He would practice opening and closing the doors. He would time how long he could be inside before someone might pass by. On one day, he even brought in a yellow cleaning in progress sign and placed it in front of the disabled bathroom near the changing rooms. Then he walked away. 2 minutes later, he returned. He even looked directly at the camera and then went inside. Each time, his rehearsals became more and more deliberate. CCTV footage from Lily's final day shows him entering the same area with a hammer tucked in his hoodie. He'd taken it from a roommate's toolbox that morning. He also had another hammer in his car, a backup that he purchased from a hardware store a few days prior, as seen in this CCTV. At 7:12 p.m, Lily walked into the gym bathroom in order to change before her water polo match. She's smiling, wearing athletic gear, and there's no indication that she feels unsafe. She simply disappears behind the bathroom door, and then at 7:14 p.m, Paul enters after her. He's still carrying that hammer. This moment, 2 minutes long, is the last time that anyone sees Lily James alive, and what happened behind that door would soon become one of the most confronting crime scenes in Sydney's recent history. It only lasted seconds, but the damage was truly irreversible. Behind the bathroom door, Paul launched a violent, targeted attack. Lily truly never stood a chance. She suffered 25 blows to the head and neck with the hammer. Forensic experts believe that the actual number may have been higher. The injuries were described as overkill. Some bones were completely shattered. There were also defensive wounds on her arms and hands, showing that she had tried to defend herself. She had tried to fight back. I feel it's also worth mentioning that there were no signs of SA. This was purely about control and punishment.
Special people come into the world and they seem to go out of the world way too soon. And that's how I see Lily.
Lily James was Barbara's only granddaughter.
She was something special. Her kindness, her loyalty to people, and just the gentlest person. Very gentle.
Barbara says she could at least understand illness or a car crash.
But murder and the way he murdered her is horrific.
After the attack, Paul didn't run away. He stayed in the bathroom for over an hour. He was just in there, alone with her body. He was possibly cleaning himself up. He was possibly just waiting and thinking. And then at 8:47 p.m, he finally left the bathroom alone. He walked to his rented SUV and drove across the city to Diamond Bay Reserve, situated in Vaucluse, an isolated cliffside area known for its views. On the way, he stopped and threw one of the hammers into a bin, and then, just before midnight, he made a call to 000. This is the Australian emergency service number. He told the dispatcher there was a body and where to find it. He refused to give his name. He didn't say how he knew. He just left the message and hung up.
I would like to report the body in St Andrew's Cathedral School in Sydney CBD.
He told the operator exactly how to find the body, but gave little other detail.
When were you there?
Don't remember.
Sorry?
I don't remember.
Do you know who it is?
No.
What's your name?
I'd rather not disclose. I think someone should just go in there before people arrive in the morning.
Then, minutes later, he sent a chilling series of text messages from Lily's phone to her father. Don't ask why or call. Please come to the school now and pick me up. Father Jamie James tried calling back, but he received no answer. He drove to the school, panicked and confused, and there he would soon learn the awful truth. His daughter wasn't waiting for him in the car park to be picked up. She was already gone. After Paul made the anonymous emergency call, he parked near the cliffs at Diamond Bay Reserve. He left no note nor an explanation, but he did leave his backpack. Inside were clothes, a toothbrush and an old phone. This was a different phone from the one that he used day to day. In fact, Lily's phone and Paul's regular phone have never been found.
Here at St Andrew's Cathedral School, the devastated friends of Lily James have been coming to lay flowers in honour of their young friend. Groups of young women have paused at the doors of the school where Lily worked as a water polo coach, visibly upset as they mourn the 21-year-old. Meanwhile, at a second crime scene in Sydney's eastern suburbs, police continue to search for Paul Tayson, Lily's presumed killer. Police have scoured the water and cliffs at Vaucluse for a second day and this morning spotted what they believe to be a body floating in the water.
Yeah, I just received a call from the full commander on scene. They're calling me off as police rescue are calling off the body recovery. It's too dangerous. They're going to try again at low tide at about 2 p.m, so I'll probably put back on the job then. Thank you.
That body is yet to be retrieved or formally identified.
Before Paul leapt, he transferred 6 months of rent to his roommates. It's like in a strange way he still wanted to tie up loose ends and didn't want to leave him hanging. At 11:45 p.m, just 3 minutes after he was last seen on CCTV, Paul vanished into the darkness below. The fall would be his final act. The cliff face at Diamond Bay is sheer, jagged and over 30 metres high. It wasn't until the next morning that a group of tradesmen working nearby spotted remains on the rocks below. Rescue crews arrived just after 8 a.m. It would take hours to retrieve the remains. By late afternoon, the body was formally identified. This was officially Paul Tayson, the smiling, dependable coach, the man who had worked alongside Lily for months, the man who had just been standing beside her hours earlier, and now both of them were gone. In the days that followed, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. This had been heavily rehearsed. It was planned out and meticulously prepared. The coroner's inquest would later confirm it. When he was entering in and out of the bathrooms, they were really dry runs. And to add to what he did in those final hours of his life, he had also lied to nearly everyone that he knew. There were no university records. He had in fact forged documents to stay in the country. He had misled friends. He'd misled his parents. And now a much darker picture of the man would emerge. In past relationships, a troubling pattern had already been formed. There was digital stalking, obsessive jealousy, and escalating behaviour when women tried to end things. In one case, he hacked into a former partner's Snapchat and then followed her across countries. He once punched a tree above a woman's head, and now, with Lily, he had taken things even further than anyone could have imagined.
But also knowing the man who killed her, Paul Tyson, is something else.
Not someone I would expect to do such a thing.
The fact that he has?
Yeah, it's a shock.
Psychologists described his actions as a textbook example of coercive control. What could look like caring was anything but. What sounded like affection was just applying pressure. But by the time that pattern was clear, it was far too late. Lily could not have seen the full picture. It was being too well hidden. 3:43 a.m. Debbie Maguire's phone buzzed beside her bed. She stirred, reached for it blindly, just expecting some late-night notification, or maybe a message from one of her kids out celebrating. Instead, it was from Hannah, her daughter. It read, "I'm sorry, Mum. I thought this was the right decision. I tried to heal and cope with it all, but I'm not okay." Her heart sank. Another message followed. "I tried messaging Locke, but he doesn't want anything to do with me now. Please check in on him. This is going to break his heart." The mother sat bolt upright. She knew that something was off. She fired back with message after message. "Where are you? You're not making sense. You're not going back to him. You can't live the way you were living, being treated like that." But she received no reply, and within just hours, smoke would rise from the bushland outside Ballarat, and it would lead to Hannah. Debbie knew her daughter. She knew her voice, her moods, her way of typing. That's why, even as the words glowed on her screen, something inside her recoiled. It didn't feel like Hannah. The spelling was right. The punctuation was perfect. But it was actually a little too perfect. Hannah was usually casual in her messages. She'd use emojis, abbreviations, and scatter typos when she was rushing. But this read like something written too carefully. The mother's immediate instinct wasn't pure grief. She didn't know quite what had happened. Instead, it was mixed with suspicion. Still, she couldn't afford to assume. She called, texted, called again. 23 messages in total. "Where are you? Please pick up. Come home to Mum, Hannah. I love you." But the phone stayed dark. By dawn, Debbie was in the car, driving to the Sebastopol house that Hannah once shared with her ex-partner, Lachlan Young. As she pulled up, she saw him. Lachlan was walking down the road with his father. She leapt from the car and told him about the texts. She asked if either of them had seen her daughter. Lachlan blinked. He looked confused and concerned. He said that he'd got some messages too. Said that he was worried too. Mother Debbie just wasn't sure what to believe, but she told him what needed to happen. She was going straight to the police. The official missing persons report was filed just after sunrise, but by then, emergency services were already dealing with something much worse. A call had come in at around 5 a.m, with reports of a vehicle fire deep in bushland, southwest of Ballarat. When firefighters arrived at State Forest Road, what they found was less of a car and more of a shell. It was a Mitsubishi Triton, melted, twisted, gutted by flame. As crews combed the interior, they found something nobody should ever have to see. In the front passenger side footwell, partially concealed beneath a warped dash, was a body. Later, they would confirm that it was Hannah Maguire. In the hours that followed, her parents were called in. What they feared most had become a reality, but the how, and more disturbingly, the why, remained unclear. The text messages still didn't make sense. Hannah hadn't shown any sign of wanting to do this. She had a new job that she loved, working with children at Delacombe Primary. She was a netballer, a teammate, a friend and a daughter. She was just weeks away from finishing her teaching degree. She was planning her future, and what she wasn't doing was giving up. Somehow, the deeper investigators dug, the less clear things became. strange money transfers surfaced. There was $5,000 wired from Hannah's account into Lachlan Young's, as well as $2,000 to her parents. All of this was done shortly before sunrise. That was when police stopped looking at Hannah's phone as evidence from her and started treating it as evidence against someone else. Just days earlier, Hannah had returned to the home that she once shared with Lachlan Young. It was meant to be a simple visit. She was just collecting a few final belongings, tying off some loose ends from a relationship that had already unravelled. There was a second intervention order in place issued just weeks earlier after Lachlan had attacked her car while she tried to pack up and leave. That time she was with her father, but this time she went alone. Police would later pinpoint the time of Hannah's final moment to being between 1:50 a.m. and 2:53 a.m. on April the 5th. Inside that time window, while her parents were asleep, while her friends were unaware, Hannah's time on this earth came to an end. Everybody close to Hannah knew that she'd been trying to get out of her old relationship. She'd been with Lachlan for nearly 3 years, and for most of that time, her friends and family had watched her spirit shrink. Her father Glenn had even helped her break into her own house one time after Lachlan confiscated her keys. Her mother Debbie had received panic phone calls where Hannah sobbed into the phone, begging for help as Lachlan followed her in his car, even trying to run her off the road, screaming at her to pull over. It wasn't a mystery to anyone who saw them together. Lachlan had a temper, he drank too much, and he didn't treat Hannah very well. In order to protect herself and start afresh, she'd taken out an intervention order. She told her workplace that he was threatening her, and that school had even gone into lockdown after Lachlan allegedly called to say that he was coming to get her. The school then assigned staff to monitor the exits, and Hannah was told to stay near the building at all times, just in case. Her friend and colleague Danielle McCann remembered asking Hannah directly, "Are you safe?" And Hannah's reply really stuck with her. She said, "I don't know." Still though, in spite of all of this, Hannah was making moves. She'd spoken to a solicitor with her dad. She sorted out her banking, now separating her finances from the old relationship. She was stepping into the new chapter of her life, and her friends noticed this too. She had found such a glow, one friend said in court, but it wouldn't last. On April the 4th, just hours before her time came to an end, Hannah was at the pub in Clunes, smiling, laughing, sharing pizza with her netball team. This was the last time that anyone saw her alive.
The Maguire family temporarily closed its pub here in Clunes following Hannah's death, but tomorrow it will reopen with the help of the former publican. Just one example of how this tight-knit community is banding together.
He's willing to come back and open the pub for us so that their money can keep ticking along and support themselves. It's sad what happened, especially in a small town where everyone's pretty close and tight.
As the investigation deepened, Lachlan Young's story began to fall apart. He had told Hannah's parents that he was worried. He told police that he didn't know where she was. He feigned shock at the money sent to his account from Hannah's. He played the concerned ex-partner, but the timeline didn't seem to match up. The messages from Hannah had been sent after investigators believed that she was already gone. So something was brewing, and then came the trial.
An emotional exit from Ballarat's courthouse for Hannah Maguire's family after they came face to face with the man police allege killed their daughter.
As you can imagine, this is a very devastating time for the family, for Hannah's loved ones, and for our community as a whole.
The defence would later argue that all of this happened due to a fight, that Hannah's time coming to an end was really just an accident, that Lachlan had thrown her to the ground during an argument, and that she'd hit her head on the bathroom sink. But prosecutors just weren't convinced. They argued instead that it was calculated, that Young had planned this, as well as the cover-up that followed. They pointed to a chilling piece of testimony from a friend of Young's named Benjamin O'Keefe. Ben, as he is referred to, told the court that Lachlan had pitched a plan just days earlier. He wanted to roofie Hannah to put her behind the wheel and then crash the car, making it look like an accident. The goal was apparently to stop her from taking the house that they had owned together, to stop her from leaving him behind. Ben told him that this sounded like a terrible idea. He told him that he wanted nothing to do with it. But on the night of April the 4th, Lachlan messaged him once again, and this time, Ben for some reason went along with him. And within just hours, detectives will be standing over a burnt-out Mitsubishi Triton situated on State Forest Road in Scarsdale. The fire had long been extinguished, but the truth was just beginning to burn its way to the surface.
Now, during this court appearance, we heard that it is Mr Young's first time in custody. During the hearing, he barely lifted his head from the dock. It was a glass-encased dock. He was flanked by 2 police guards. Also in the court were loved ones of Ms Maguire. They could barely look at the accused as the hearing proceeded. We heard from the accused lawyer. As I mentioned, it's his first time in custody, and due to the nature of this charge being murder, the lawyer could not make an application for bail. We heard from police prosecution, who described this case as an incredibly complex one. We heard that multiple crime scenes have been established and they're undergoing analysis as we speak. Police will also be analysing several items, including CCTV, and we've heard that DNA evidence needs to be obtained and also analysed. So as I said,
on July the 9th, 2025, in the Supreme Court at Ballarat, Lachlan Young stood accused of murder. He entered a plea of not guilty. He admitted that he had caused Hannah's death, yes, but he insisted it wasn't murder, that it was all just spontaneous, an accident from a moment of rage. He even offered to plead guilty to manslaughter, but the prosecution rejected it. They argue that he'd planned this from the beginning, that the messages, the money, the fire, all of it pointed to intent, and they even had a witness to back it up. That was Ben O'Keefe.
The jury heard Lachlan ask, "What are we going to do with the car?" O'Keefe replied, "Dump it. We will get in more trouble for starting a bushfire." Later that day, another friend messaged O'Keefe to say Hannah was dead. He says he confronted Lachlan at his parents' home. Hannah better not have been in that car. She was. She was already deceased. She was suffocated. Why would you get me to do something like that in my car? You've implicated me in a murder. To which Young replied calmly, "Don't worry, the police won't come."
O'Keefe testified that Lachlan had talked about crashing the car with Hannah unconscious behind the wheel, that he'd asked him to come along for the ride, that he'd paid him $45 to bring a second car so that Lachlan would have a way home after torching the scene. Ben O'Keefe told the court he didn't know Hannah was in the car, that he'd never actually looked inside. Lachlan's defence accused him of lying, of helping, of trying to save himself from being charged. But prosecutors had Lachlan's text messages, his voice messages, and the bank transfers initiated by Lachlan using Hannah's phone. Also notable is the fire. It was deliberately lit by using a yellow blowtorch, later recovered near the crime scene. Evidence was now piling up against him, and then a sudden shift, a development that would bring the entire courtroom to its feet. Friday morning, July the 18th, 2025. It was just 8 days into a trial that was expected to last for 8 weeks. Lachlan Young stood in front of a packed Supreme Court. He had been rearranged. This time, when I asked how he wanted to plead to the charge of murder, he didn't hesitate. "Guilty," he said. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then the courtroom erupted. Hannah's friends and family clutched each other weeping. Some applauded, others stood frozen, too overcome to move. Justice James Elliott thanked the jury for their service, and then ordered Lachlan Young to be taken back to the cells. Behind him was the weight of everything that he'd done, everything that he'd tried to hide, and everything that had finally collapsed in on him.
Hannah's family is from here in Clunes, around 30 minutes from Ballarat. This pub is where her dad last saw her. Tonight it'll be where the community celebrates a bittersweet legal win.
It's one thing to lose a daughter, it's another to hear her killer speak the truth for the first time. Hannah Maguire's parents vindicated after the worst was confirmed by the very person responsible for destroying their world. Lachlan Young suddenly changing his plea to guilty, admitting he murdered his ex. A mid-trial confession that was met by a roar of applause.
It was a stunning twist in the trial, which has already been running for 8 days. Young had admitted he killed Ms Maguire and staged her death to look like a suicide before torching her car with her body inside in remote bushland near Ballarat. But until today, he denied he intended to do it, claiming his former partner's death was unplanned and spontaneous. Then this morning, he had a dramatic change of heart and was rearranged, pleading guilty to murder. It's a moment Hannah Maguire's grieving family has been waiting for since her death 15 months ago.
He had tried to erase a life, to turn a desperate, violent act into something else that would absolve himself entirely. But in the end, the truth held out. No more excuses, no more stories, no more lies. He will face a sentencing hearing later this year. It started with a sealed envelope, then another and another, laid out side by side on a kitchen table, as if someone was preparing for something final. Across town, a teenager stepped off a bus, unaware she was being watched. She took the same route home as she always did, the same time, the same quiet street. Inside the house, her older brother was upstairs, headphones on. The front door creaked open, and what unfolded next would only last seconds. But it had been building for years. There were warnings. There were reports. There was a trail of missed chances that nobody followed. This could have been stopped. By the time John Edwards did what he did, he'd already left a long trail of damage behind him. Over the course of 5 decades, he'd fathered 10 children to 7 different women. 4 of those women had formally accused him of mistreating them, both psychologically and physically. At least one of his adult daughters had taken out an apprehended violence order, or AVO, against him. One ex-partner changed her name and moved interstate just to escape him. But none of this stopped him from gaining access to the kids that he had with Olga. They were named Jack and Jennifer. John Edwards was a retired financial advisor and a former army reservist. He was outwardly composed, conservative, and well-educated. People called him controlling, but not dangerous, at least not on paper. In reality, though, he was described by one ex as a sadist hiding in plain sight. He regulated every dollar that Olga spent. He controlled her wardrobe, her phone, even her yoga class schedule. Once, when she refused to wear high heels on a shopping trip, he told her to go back upstairs and change into something appropriate. He didn't scream at her, and he didn't punch the walls. He just made it feel like your life wasn't yours anymore. According to testimony from one of his other ex-partners, John would start small. Comments about clothing, weight, tone of voice, and then it would escalate. A thrown object, a slammed door, a threat disguised as a joke. Over time, you stopped challenging him. You stopped talking back. You just hoped that he wouldn't snap. And when Olga finally left him in 2016, she knew, deep down, that this didn't just mean that she was free. She told a psychologist that she feared waking up one day and finding Jack dead because John could never control his temper. She told police about how he treated her. She filed reports. She warned the court. But none of this seemed to matter, at least not to the police, not to the family court, and not to the system that gave him a gun. When Olga left John in early 2016, she did everything that she was supposed to do. She moved out, she cut off all contact, she took the children with her. She even reported the violence to the police 3 separate times. She told officers that John had kicked Jack, that she'd punched him and slapped Jennifer. He'd even once grabbed his son by the throat in public. She also told them that she feared he would eventually kill one of their offspring. But frustratingly, what happened next would set the stage for everything that followed. The senior constable who took Olga's statement failed to classify it as assault. Instead, the report was marked "No offence detected." Even worse, the children weren't recorded as victims at all. This meant that the violence did not show up in the system. And so when the custody battle reached the family court, John Edwards arrived with a blank record and a story. He told the court that Olga was bitter, unstable, and trying to alienate the children. And somehow, it worked. Despite psychologist reports, police contact, and mounting concerns about his behaviour, the independent children's lawyer, Debbie Morton, advised the court that there was no reason to deny John access. Morton would later claim that she didn't recall either of the children expressing fear of their father. However, both Jack and Jennifer had both told therapists they were terrified of him. In fact, Jennifer had even explicitly asked that the court write an order banning contact. That request, though, was never passed on. At one point during the proceedings, the family's psychologist pulled Morton aside. She warned her that John was more dangerous than he appears. "I never felt Jack was safe with John," she later testified, "not even for a car ride." But Morton reportedly dismissed Olga's presentation in court as simply being too emotional. At one point, she even described her as a hard-nosed bitch. Olga would win full custody in 2018, but by then, it was too late. John Edwards had found out where they lived, and he'd already started planning what would come next. There were two moments, two decisions that could have changed everything. The first came in March of 2016. John Edwards walked into Hornsby police station and calmly told officers that his ex-wife, Olga, might soon make false allegations against him as part of a custody dispute. He said he wanted it on record. So you see, he'd set the whole thing up. The second came 9 months later when Olga reported those allegations. She told Senior Constable Brooke Cooper that John had physically assaulted her, Jack and Jennifer. The officer did make some notes. She asked Olga to bring the kids in for interviews, but when Olga didn't just return straight away, the file was closed. There was no follow-up. There was no welfare check. Instead, a note was just added to the case file, suggesting that Olga may have fabricated the story in order to gain an advantage in court. Police did exactly what John asked them to do. And all of this means that when the New South Wales Firearms Registry later ran a background check on John, the system came up mostly clean. The algorithm didn't flag misfiled reports. It didn't notice mislabeled victims. It didn't count "no offence detected" as cause for concern. The only red mark on his record was an AVO from one of his adult daughters, and that was filed back in 2011. None of this was enough to stop a gun licence. So in May of 2017, John Edwards legally obtained permits to purchase both a pistol and a rifle. Later, the registry staff, according to the coroner, were operating under a dangerously narrow interpretation of their duties. They believed that they could only deny a licence if a mandatory disqualifier was present, something like a criminal conviction or an active AVO. But John Edwards had pretty much made a career of staying just inside the lines. He hadn't been charged with anything since 1998. And so, the coroner would later write, a complete failure to appreciate the pattern of DV going back 24 years led directly to John Edwards legally owning 5 firearms by the end of 2017. One of these was a 9mm Glock, the other was a .357 Magnum revolver. They were both kept in a locked cabinet at the St Mary's Pistol Club. By the time that John Edwards showed up at the Pistol Club on the 4th of July 2018, everything was in place. He had booked a rental car. This is because Jack and Jennifer both knew what his regular car looked like. The weapons were ready. They were loaded and stored under his name. The club membership was active despite earlier red flags, and nobody had stopped him. Years earlier, John had been denied a firearms license after falsely stating that he'd never been the subject of an AVO. One club even described him as aggressive and claimed that he was trying to railroad them into giving him membership. However, when that failed, he simply applied elsewhere and lied once again. He told the St Mary's Pistol Club that he'd left the previous club over a personality clash, and they didn't really check any further. Had they looked into his previous rejection, they might have seen the pattern. Had the registry officers cross-checked court filings and police notes with DV histories, they might have seen the danger, but no one did. Instead, John walked into that club, opened his locker and retrieved 2 powerful handguns. He seemed flustered, according to staff. In fact, he slammed the locker shut so hard that he jammed the locker door and it needed to be pried open with a screwdriver. This doesn't sound like someone in a good state of mind. The very next day, he left his Normanhurst home and drove to Pennant Hills Station. Jennifer got off the school bus just before 5 p.m. John followed her in the rental car. He then waited until she reached the front door and then pulled onto the driveway. Inside that house, 15-year-old Jack was playing Fortnite in his bedroom. Jennifer ran for her life up the stairs. What happened next lasted just seconds, but it could never be undone. Police later determined that Edwards had used the Glock on both Jennifer and Jack. They were found crumpled together beneath Jack's desk. Jennifer had tried to hide, and Jack had likely tried to protect her, but neither of them stood a chance. Later that evening, John Edwards returned home. He wrote a few more letters, and then did the same to himself, as he had done to Jennifer and Jack. Many who followed the inquest believe that this was his final act of control, a planned, cold attack on the people he believed Olga had taken from him, and then removing himself from the situation.
2 precious, innocent lives lost in a moment of ultimate cowardice that has devastated not only family and friends, but the entire community.
You know, how could this happen?
Just send shivers down your spine. I was feeling ill.
Jack and Jennifer's mother, Olga, returned home today, ushered in by detectives and followed soon after by the family dog, confronting the scene where just 2 nights ago her ex-husband John took their children's lives.
We don't know how the hell anyone would ever be able to get over that.
School friends and sporting teammates among a stream of people paying their respects, remembering smiling, happy faces that hid the pain of their parents' bitter 2-year custody battle.
He's a very nice guy. Very tragic what happened to him.
Jennifer's such a great friend. She helped us around the school and she's a really supportive friend.
The growing floral tribute makes clear where this horrific crime took place, but for 2 years, Olga Edwards had tried to keep the location a secret to protect her children from their father, who had been banned from seeing them. Among the many unanswered questions, how Edwards was able to track them down, why he was granted a gun licence if he was considered a threat to his family, and why he was allowed to remove the weapons from his gun club at St Mary's.
It's terrible to think these things can happen so close to home.
A car was removed last night from outside Edwards' house at Normanhurst. He reportedly hired one to avoid his children recognising him when he arrived, all part of an evil plan he's believed to have prepared for more than a year.
The inquest into the end of Jack and Jennifer Edwards ran for months. 30 witnesses were called. Thousands of documents were reviewed, but time and time again, the same theme emerged. This didn't come out of nowhere. This wasn't unpredictable. This wasn't unknowable. In fact, it was entirely preventable. There were so many chances. The coroner, Teresa O'Sullivan, fought back tears as she read her findings. She pointed to failures at every level. Police who misclassified reports, firearms registry staff who weren't trained to identify patterns of behaviour, and a court-appointed children's lawyer who failed to convey the children's fear. O'Sullivan saved some of her strongest criticism for that lawyer, Debbie Morton, who, O'Sullivan said, did not take reasonable steps to verify the children's statements. She failed to present Jennifer's plea to ban contact with her father, and she did not properly assess or report the risk that John Edwards actually posed, even after being directly warned by psychologists. Morton has since been removed from the legal aid panel. She does, however, deny any wrongdoing. but the consequences of her omissions are irreversible. One of the psychologists told the inquest that she'd feared John Edwards' retribution so strongly that she avoided telling him what she truly thought, that he was dangerous and that Jack and Jennifer should never be left alone with him. And she was right to be afraid. He had a documented history of retaliating against women who challenged his authority. One former partner described how she fled over a backyard fence along with her children after he threw a rolling pin at her head. Another described having an abduction plan drilled into her by her own mother just in case. One adult daughter recalled a chilling moment when John Edwards screamed threats and held a cigarette lighter to a coffee table, asking, "Should I set fire to the whole house? Is that what you want me to do?" Again and again, professionals testified that they felt something was very, very wrong, but they either didn't act or they just weren't believed. And now Jack and Jennifer were gone, and the system was left scrambling to explain or to excuse why no one connected the dots. At Jack and Jennifer's funeral, DV campaigner Natalia Esdale-Watts approached Olga and asked her to share her story publicly. Olga, however, refused. "There is no hope here," she said. "Whatever you can do it to leave this country." Somehow things find a way to get even worse. 5 months after the event, it all got too much for Mother Olga, and her time on this earth came to an end in the very same house where this all happened. In her final days, she was living in Jack's bedroom. She was sleeping where the bodies had been found. Friends say that she was consumed by grief and by guilt. She tried everything. She went to the police. She hired lawyers. She told psychologists, teachers, as well as social workers what John was capable of. But the more she spoke up, somehow the less she was believed. Rose Batty, another woman who lost someone in a similar way, said it best. John Edwards didn't murder Olga, but he may as well have. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that his actions would break her, and he wanted her to live with that, to suffer, and for him to not be held accountable. It was his final act of power.
Jennifer loved caring for animals and dreamed of being a vet. Older brother Jack was cheeky and headstrong. They had a mother who loved them and a father who killed them. An inquest today finding police, the firearms registry and the family law system failed to pick up on the warning signs. His smile hid a heinous side seen by his 7 partners and 10 children. 50 years of violence, stalking and intimidation. Police admitting they either failed to record or even read his case notes, which allowed John Edwards to legally purchase 5 firearms. In a 272-page report, the coroner summed it up with one sentence. The evidence plainly reveals the deaths of Jack and Jennifer were preventable.
A coroner would later call the murders a stark reminder of the systemic failure too many women and children face every day. She issued 24 recommendations, including mandatory DV training for police, stronger screening at the firearms registry, better sharing of information between the court system and law enforcement, and stricter oversight of independent children's lawyers. Some of those changes have already been implemented, others are still under review, but none of them will bring back Jack, Jennifer, or Olga. Their half-siblings who never even got to meet them told the court that they see themselves in Jack and Jennifer. They were other versions of us, one said. They had lived with John. As the final word, one of John Edwards' ex-partners, someone who escaped his control decades earlier, offered this chilling reflection. In the end, he won. He got to keep everything. He got to see the kids. He was not going to be told by anyone what he could and couldn't do. She also admitted this. When I heard that he was dead, I finally stopped checking the rearview mirror. This is the true story of Lisa Holm, a loving and intelligent 17-year-old girl, a young woman that was spreading her wings and entering the bigger world, but then she vanished. seemingly into thin air. But with no enemies and in a safe location, where could Lisa have gone? Our love and respect goes out to all those that knew and loved Lisa and all those affected by this case. I just want to preface this video by apologising for my pronunciations of some Swedish words and places. I have tried my hardest to get these words right, but I am definitely not a native Swedish speaker, so here we go. Lisa Holm was born on the 7th of February 1998. She grew up in the small picturesque town of Skövde, Sweden with her family. Lisa was a kind and caring person who loved animals, listening to music and spending time with her friends. Lisa's mother, Lena Holm, described her daughter as an amazing girl with a heart of gold. She was always there for her friends and family, and she had so many plans for the future. And that she did. She had just graduated from high school and had taken on a new job at a cafe in Blomberg. This was just a 45-minute drive from her hometown. Blomberg is a small village in a rural area east of Gothenburg. It was just a stopgap, a summer job before she went on to study social sciences. As a present for graduating and to get her to her new job, her father had bought her a moped to give her some independence. The world was opening up to 17-year-old Lisa. I remember being this age, and it really is the most exciting time you'll ever have. For 2 weeks, Lisa and her father had travelled back and forth for her shifts at the cafe. Her dad travelled with her to let her gain some confidence on the scooter. She was new to the moped and it wasn't the quickest journey, but now she was ready. On the 24th of May 2015, a video was uploaded to YouTube by the user Lisa Holm. The video was a simple countdown timer. The countdown started at 1 minute and 1 second. The video is only 11 or 12 seconds in duration. The video ended when the countdown hit 50 seconds. The video was titled 13. What you're seeing on screen now is that actual video. On Sunday the 7th of June 2015, Lisa set off for work, alone, for the first time. Lisa was on the closing shift. She made it there with time to spare, a successful journey. Her shift went on as was to be expected. She laughed with customers, she chatted with her colleagues, but generally speaking, the day was uneventful. Lisa and her colleagues began to close up at around 6 p.m, and by 6:23 p.m, she texted her dad to say she was leaving the cafe and would be home soon. A successful first day as an independent young woman. Shortly after this, she phoned her dad, but it seemed to be an accident, a pocket dial. He could hear the cheerful murmuring of voices from her co-workers. This was positive, it was happy, there was nothing untoward. But unbeknownst to Lisa's father, this would be the last time he would ever hear her voice. The journey from the cafe to Lisa's home should have taken around 40 to 45 minutes, but by 7:30 p.m, she still wasn't home. Her parents tried to call her, but it repeatedly went straight to voicemail. They became increasingly anxious, so her father drove along the route that she was taking. He checked every roadside ditch, scared that she'd had an accident. However, there was no sign of her at all. When he arrived at the cafe and saw the moped outside, he had a moment of immense relief, but this moment was short-lived. As he got closer, he saw the keys in the ignition. The relief was cruelly snatched away and replaced with a creeping dread. Lisa was wise. She would not just leave the keys in the scooter and walk away. After searching the cafe and the surrounding area to no avail, Lisa's father called the police, who launched a preliminary investigation. When the police arrived at the cafe, they searched the area for any sign of the missing girl. Anyone who knew Lisa knew they were looking at a case of abduction and not a runaway. With the help of a police dog, they searched the surrounding areas. This included a conspicuous barn that sat across from the cafe, but nothing. They knocked on doors, asking local residents for any information that could help. The search continued overnight, leading into Monday the 8th of June, but it was all fruitless. In the morning, they released a statement to say that a teenage girl was missing. They chose not to reveal Lisa's name, holding the information close to their chest, but they felt this gave enough information away to assist the investigation. At the same time, the police made a harrowing discovery. A moped glove had been found in the barn opposite the cafe. It was confirmed to be Lisa's. This was the same barn that had been searched by the police and the search dogs the nights before. Strangely though, nothing had been found during those initial searches. The glove had been handed in to the police by the landlord of the Blomberg estates. He said that it had been found by farm workers who had gone into the barn to begin their work that morning. Unfortunately, the chain of custody for the glove was not entirely reliable. This essentially invalidated any forensic evidence that could have been taken from it. But the discovery of the glove changed the course of the investigation. The investigation was consequently upgraded. This allowed authorities to make use of all resources available to them. This meant more officers, larger search parties, and more manpower. Officers established a command centre at Kelby Sports Ground near the cafe, and quickly more traces of Lisa were discovered. A few hundred metres south, officers found what appeared to be the contents of her pockets. A mobile phone case, 2 old receipts, a used metro ticket, and a smashed mobile phone screen. With some solid progress finally coming, all the items were identified as Lisa's by her parents. These items were found on a small gravel road off the beaten track. If you weren't a local, you probably wouldn't even know that the path existed. The discovery of the smashed mobile phone confirmed the police's worst fears. One of the first ports of call was to trace a teenager's movements using her cell phone. But when they triangulated her phone on the day of her disappearance, they reached a dead end. Lisa's last known location was at the cafe, but there was no activity after she left. This told investigators that she may have been told to switch off her mobile, or more concerningly, it was taken from her so that a captor could destroy it. With a smashed screen found, things weren't looking too good. Lisa's family, friends, and 2 colleagues were interviewed, but no new leads were found. Lisa was just a normal 17-year-old girl from a small town. There was simply no one that anyone could think of that would want to do her any harm. On the very next day, Tuesday the 9th of June, more evidence was found. Her driver's license and house keys. But still no Lisa and no indication of where she could be. The search teams emptied mineral wells, they scoured buildings and waded through farmlands, all in the hopes of finding anything that could point them in the right direction. But time was quickly running out. The chances of someone being returned home safely were exponentially lessening as the days drew on. The police and the family made the call to release Lisa's identity to the public on Wednesday the 10th of June. After this press conference, almost 1,000 people flocked from across Sweden to help aid the search. To this day, this search party for Lisa is the largest Sweden has ever seen. With the extra manpower, the search parties began to go back over places that they'd already searched. One of these places was the barn. During yet another search of the barn, investigators found one of Lisa's earrings near the entrance. Police narrowed in on the barn and forensics teams were brought in to obtain as much information as possible. They discovered some biological matter, namely human feces. These were believed to actually belong to the person responsible for taking Lisa. Due to human evolution, during times of immense rushes, there can be an urge to void the bowels. These speculated that whoever took Lisa experienced this adrenaline rush. For them, this was all a thrill. Whilst forensic investigators narrowed in on the barn, the search area grew to a 5-kilometre radius around the cafe, including nearby farms and residences. Searchers reached a property called Martorp Farm, which sat a few kilometres from the cafe. Whilst they were there, 2 men turned up in a car. They claimed that the farm had already been examined and not to waste their time. But something didn't seem right. The volunteers were suspicious and decided they should call it in to the police. When law enforcement arrived, they continued to hunt, and soon they found Lisa's helmet, jacket, and earphones hidden under the twigs and foliage. Nearby was an old wooden trailer or work shed that looked like it had been recently accessed. The long grass leading up to it was flattened or pushed down. As they entered, the unmistakable smell of death hit them in the face. Inside, there were benches and lockers like an old changing room. The lockers were closed except one that was full of old clothes. They then opened every locker, but they found nothing. They then looked more closely at the locker stuffed with clothes. In that cramped, narrow space, they realized they weren't looking simply at clothing. Instead, they had found Lisa, stuffed into the locker, no longer breathing. She was only half dressed and had a rope around her neck. Duct tape was over her mouth and her nose. On Friday the 12th of June, the police stormed the house at Martrup Farm. They arrested a 25-year-old man, his wife and his brother. Nerejus Belavicius, his brother Ivarus, and Nerejus's wife. The Lithuanian brothers worked as labourers on Martrup Farm, and also in the barn by the cafe. Their house led directly onto the gravel road where Lisa's belongings had been discarded. It was between the farm and the barn. They all denied any involvement in Lisa's case, and they acted as alibis for each other. The barn was inspected once again amid growing criticism that the police had not been thorough enough. This barn wasn't just one wide open space. There were several rooms, including an office and a milking room. The office had a large window with a clear view of the cafe. From it, anyone in there could see young waitresses coming in and out serving customers. In that office was evidence of self-gratification on the wall by the window. Stains, if you will. After these stains were tested for DNA, they were found to be a positive match for Nerejus. Disturbingly, Lisa's co-workers from the cafe later recalled seeing one or both of the brothers staring at them from that window. In the milking room, there was a pipe sticking out of the wall with a rope on it. This later tested positive for Lisa's DNA. This is where she is thought to have taken her final breaths. Police now piece together the gruesome timeline. Nerejus pulled up in the car just as Lisa was getting on her moped. It is likely that he grabbed her and dragged her into the barn. To silence her, he used duct tape. He then suspended her from a pipe in the milking room. The attack was most likely carnally motivated. Although an autopsy determined that Lisa hadn't been violated, male fluids were found on all of her clothes and in the barn. Investigators believed that Nerejus had gotten so aroused that he gratified himself as Lisa was taking her final breath. He then took her body to the trailer on Martrup Farm and put her in the locker, disposing of her belongings along the way. It was a senseless attack and an even more senseless disposal. However, his alibis were concrete. Oh wait, no they weren't. Brother Ivarus folded like a glass bedsheet. Badly. He eventually told the truth. He admitted that his brother had acted strangely the night of Lisa's disappearance, going out and then putting his clothes in the washing machine upon his return. His brother had asked him to give a false alibi when the police came to question them. He said that the police were bound to blame a non-national for the crime, and his brother played along. However, the real reason was that he himself had committed the crime. But now the police had everything. Nerejus' DNA was all over the crime scene, Lisa's clothes, and he had no alibi. Remember the countdown clock that I mentioned earlier in the video? This was something that went viral around the time that Lisa vanished. Online communities jumped on this element of the story, a kind of once-in-a-lifetime event that is like something from a movie or gritty Netflix drama. The title of the video, 13, was the number of full days between the video being posted and Lisa disappearing. The channel name name was obviously Lisa Holm. So many were theorising that this all pointed towards this crime being premeditated. Premeditation makes a big difference with what charges can be brought against a suspect and what sentences will be handed down to them. Police investigated the origins of the video. However, they discovered it was nothing more than a cruel hoax. The video title had been changed to 13 after Lisa vanished, and the channel name was also changed to Lisa Holm, just to add to this cruel mystique. In November 2015, the case went to trial. The prosecutors argued that Nerejus had kidnapped Lisa so that he could intimately violate her. When police seized his computers, they discovered a lot of dark and disturbing adult films. Suspending Lisa from the pipe in the milking room was for his own gratification, trying to reenact the films on his computer. And then after the fact, once he'd had what he wanted, he tried to hide what he had done. It was hard to argue against the concrete facts, against the evidence. But strangely, his defense tried to push the blame onto his younger brother. They said that he had planted the evidence. They argued that there was no DNA found in the car, so how could he have transported the body? That is a valid argument, but thankfully one that didn't hold up against the mountains of evidence stacked against him. He denied ever having met Lisa at all, saying, "I have not ever met this girl, I have only seen her picture. I know how difficult it is for the family and I suffer with them. I myself am a father." No DNA of either of us was found. He couldn't be placed anywhere near Lisa. On the 17th of November 2015, a verdict was reached. Nerejus Believicius was found guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison for his crime. The monster who took the beautiful and kind Lisa would spend the rest of his life in prison. It just turns out that the rest of his life wasn't very long. On the 3rd of August 2022, Nerejus was jabbed in the neck with a sharp implement by another inmate. This is no justice for the pain he caused the family and friends of Lisa Holm, but they can rest assured he will never be able to do anyone else harm, ever again. The van didn't just appear to be abandoned, it looked like it had been hidden. It was bogged deep in bushland, 35 kilometers from the nearest track. Its recovery boards had been deployed but left behind. Inside, everything was strangely intact. Food, water, clothes. There were no signs of a struggle, but also no sign of Karolina. There were no footprints, no phone, no notes left behind. She was simply gone. 26 years old, a solo backpacker with a solid plan. Her van fitted for survival. She'd made contact with her friends less than 48 hours earlier, so why would she walk into the outback alone without shoes? Why leave her only protection behind? Unless that is, something or someone made her run. Because this part of Western Australia is remote, and out here, if someone did want to make a person disappear, they could. By the way, this is Dark Case, and you can call me Jack. I bring you rare and unseen true crime cases, as well as other things that you may later regret knowing, with multiple uploads every single week. So if this sounds like your kind of thing, make sure you join the Dark Case family now by hitting subscribe and turning on all notifications. And if you are already a subscriber, just double check those notifications, because only around 13% of you have them actually turned on. And now for today's silly little question. What's the furthest you've ever walked, jogged or ran in one go? Let me know down in the comments. All of your support over on Patreon, as well as right here via channel memberships on YouTube, are so appreciated, and I really can't thank you all enough. However, of course, thank you. But now, on with the video. Karolina Vila had been in Australia for 2 years. The 26-year-old had worked mine site jobs in remote Western Australia, and she'd spent time in Fremantle. And whilst there, she lived for a while at the Sundance Backpackers Hostel. Like many solo travellers, she craved freedom and adventure. So in June, she bought a black and silver Mitsubishi Delica van. She packed it with supplies, and she told her friends that she was heading northeast, out towards the remote Wheat Belt region. Her plan was to explore some of the state's hidden bushland and then eventually head to the east coast. On June the 28th, Karolina left Fremantle alone. A friend then received a 7 a.m. message from her that morning saying that she couldn't drop off a book and jerry can as planned. Later that afternoon at 4:28 p.m, she was last seen on CCTV filling her van with fuel at a gas station in Tudier. She paid inside and then left at 4:41 p.m, and she drove off into the wheat belt. That night, she messaged another friend with a short voice recording. She said, "I just couldn't wait anymore. Ugh, I felt tired." By noon the next day, on June the 29th, she appeared once again. She was captured on CCTV at a small general store in Beacon. This is 300 kilometres northeast of Perth, where Karolina browsed quietly, dressed in ripped blue jeans, a cream-coloured long-sleeve top, and a matching scarf. She seemed tired, probably weary from the road, but she was also calm. Police believe that after leaving that shop, she continued east, possibly towards Waiauki, another small outpost on the edge of the Corcoran Hill Nature Reserve. That was their last confirmed sighting. From June the 30th onwards, Karolina's phone went silent. There was no longer any social media activity. There were no messages and no more updates. Her family in Germany, used to hearing from her regularly, began to panic. By July the 7th, more than a week after she vanished, the family reported her missing through Interpol. That same day, the Western Australia Police launched a major search.
Investigators are using planes and helicopters as they scour the remote areas of the wheat belt, with local officers checking campgrounds and trails. But police say that Karolina's disappearance is concerning and unusual, and they're not ruling out anything as the search expands nationally.
Western Australia's wheat belt is beautiful, but it is unforgiving. A place of vast skies, red dirt and dense wattle scrub. With just 123 people living in Beacon, and even fewer scattered across the nearby bush, a lone traveller could easily vanish without anyone noticing. Karolina's friends and family, though, didn't stay silent. They wanted her found. Her mother, Katja, still in Germany, took to social media with a desperate plea. "Karolina is still sorely missed. Please keep your eyes open."
Karolina is described as of German origin, of slim build with brown curly hair, brown eyes and several tattoos, including a distinctive symbols tattoo on her left forearm. Karolina has been backpacking within Australia for the last 2 years and more recently working in regional WA on mine sites and primarily living in backpackers and hostels on a return to Perth. WA police urge anyone who has seen Karolina, has any footage or any information that may assist us in regard to a location, to come forward. Contact police immediately on 131444.
Backpackers who had last seen her in Fremantle also began sharing her photo, just hoping that someone might recognise the distinctive van, a black and silver Delica with a rooftop tent and recovery board strapped to the back. I really love vans and campers, by the way. I know you don't know that about me, but Delicas are just awesome, like the coolest van you can get. Western Australia Police Major Crime Division took over the investigation. Karolina's complete disappearance was deeply concerning. She hadn't used her phone, nor had she accessed her bank account. In fact, she hadn't contacted a single person, and the longer that silence dragged on, the more ominous it all felt. On July the 10th, 12 days after her last known sighting, investigators caught their first real break. A pilot from the police air wing spotted a dark vehicle deep in the bushland of the Corcoran Hill Nature Reserve. In fact, it was more than 50 kilometres from the nearest track. Officers on foot approached cautiously. There was no sign of struggle. There was no red spatter, and there were no personal belongings scattered outside to make it look like anything had happened at all. However, the van was clearly stuck. It was wedged into soft earth, with the yellow recovery tracks still placed under the rear tyres in a failed attempt to get it moving once again. Inside, investigators found survival gear, solar panels, clothing, some food, and several litres of water. These are all things that could have kept a stranded traveller alive for weeks. So why had Karolina left it? A forensic team arrived to comb through every item inside. Investigators hoped to determine what she might have taken with her. A backpack, shoes, water bottle, compass, anything useful. The problem was the vehicle was located at least 35 kilometres from the nearest marked path. If Karolina had just walked away, that meant she would have entered the harshest landscapes in Western Australia. They are dense with rocky outcrops. There's no signage and no reliable landmarks. Temperatures were dropping below freezing overnight. And to make things worse, there had been rain. Rescuers feared that if she was out there alone, she would have succumbed to the elements, or simply become too lost to ever be found. However, they pressed on. They launched a full-scale ground and air search, fanning out across the Corcoran Hill Reserve. Helicopters scoured the terrain. Volunteers walked grid patterns through the thick scrub. Police across the state were brought in, and their working theory was simple. She'd left her vehicle, which meant that she couldn't have gotten too far. The only question was whether they could find her in time, or if she'd suffered a terrible fate at the hands of someone else.
I would say in the last few days, each time I've gone into the shop or I've been at the club, you hear talk of, have you heard any updates and stuff, and hearing real concern from our local members. And, pretty much we're just hoping for the best, that this girl is found safe. And so last night at the country club, we had the news going and everyone's eyes were glued to it, wanting to, just really hoping that there was a good update. Unfortunately not, but here's to the next few days, hopefully soon.
By the time Karolina's van was discovered, she'd already been missing for 11 long days. Every survival expert knew that the clock was nearly out. In fact, her time was probably already up. Western Australia Police launched an expanded land and air search, but it based these on the fact that Karolina could still be alive, or they could just be looking for a body. Her last known location where the van was found was a place where even seasoned bushwalkers would carry locator beacons and survival gear. Police began mapping likely footpaths from the site. They were now using drones with heat imaging. They used satellite coordinates and weather data, but the terrain was fighting back. Much of the area was just dense scrub, where visibility dropped to basically zero. The ground was uneven, the plant life was thorny, and in the colder zones, searchers had to battle freezing wind, mud, and temperatures close to zero in the later hours. Basically, out there, everything is competing to be the first thing to kill you. But still, they didn't stop. Officers used Karolina's likely pace, direction of travel, and terrain modelling to calculate where she might have gone, if and only if she were walking west. This is because some broken twigs near the vehicle suggested she may have headed in that direction. Helicopters buzzed overhead throughout the day. Police on dirt bikes and foot combed the surrounding kilometres, but nobody found a thing. Every hour that passed increased the odds of a tragic outcome. Detectives from the Homicide Division were brought in to assist. Karolina's name was circulated through national and international missing persons databases. The Western Australia Premier Roger Cook issued a public statement saying that his heart went out to Karolina's loved ones, adding that this case was remarkable and deeply troubling.
Sure. Yeah, right. But you're going to go right in the middle, eh? The police are throwing a lot of resources at this particular task. It often takes a while for a missing person to be reported to police, and obviously they can only act on the basis of those reports. They've moved swiftly now, and the search is ongoing and is resource intensive. We want to bring Karolina home, and the police are doing everything they can.
Search teams prepared to scale back their efforts by sunset on July the 11th. But before they could leave, a single call came through from a dirt road 24 kilometres west of the van. Tanya Henley had no plans to be out that way. The weather had turned again. It was cold and windy. The road was gravel, narrow and nearly always empty, but as she drove along Maroubra Road, something unusual caught her eye. A thin figure, barefoot, waving both arms. Tanya slowed to a crawl. She already knew what she was seeing. "There's nobody who comes up my way walking around," she later said. And that slow, struggling figure waving their arms was indeed Karolina. She was starving, mosquito-bitten, and wearing the same cream-coloured top and scarf seen in the last CCTV footage from Beacon. One foot was now wrapped in fabric. She was pale, skeletal, but still standing. Tanya stopped the car and gave her an apple. Then she called the police.
She did an amazing job to survive. Like, she told me, like, she was in a cave for a couple of days, you know, so she was resilient. I mean, you'd have to have a lot of determination to survive. 12 days is pretty incredible, really.
Yeah, can you just run me through, like, that starting? Were you out trying to look for her?
I went out to actually send a picture to the police. Not the day that I found her, the day before. So I'd been out in the reserve because that's the only way I can do that. I've got Wi-Fi calling. That doesn't show. You can't send pictures through Messenger. Message. You know. So I went out there and I thought, no, I'll just keep looking. And I went probably 3/4 of the way down the reserve, down to the grid, and then I turned around and came back. But I checked just tracks and things like that, because you can tell tracks last a long time in here. But it had rained, see, and that would have made it hard for anybody to find her anyway. And so I kept. Wow.
What made you want to start looking? You know, did you think you just had a hunch that she could be out there close by to you, or?
My friends kept saying, "You'll find her," and I go, "No, I don't think so." You know, it would be nice, but yeah, because you know, the odds of finding anybody after 12 days are really remote. Like alive, and she was well. She was well, thin but well, fragile. Yes, because I mean, yeah, and the midges are bad this time of year, and yeah, they had bitten her. But, you know, other than she was remarkably well, you know, for a person that had been out in the bush for 12 days. Yeah. She didn't know what day it was, and I suppose you would lose track of how many days. But it was just incredible because she trekked overland, no shoes on, and I'm thinking it must be about 50 k's. I think, if not more.
Yeah, it seems impossible to even believe. Were you just in a state of shock yourself? I mean...
Oh, I was a bit, but I thought it probably was meant to be. Like, you know, she was so lucky. I did say that, you know, she just, yeah, she wasn't meant to go this time.
No.
Remember that. Tell your grandkids that, you know. Yeah.
Karolina doesn't remember the exact moment that she realised she was lost. After crashing her van on uneven terrain, she hit her head, and she hit it hard. The next day, confused and disorientated, she panicked. Despite having food, water, and shelter in the van, she instead left. In her own words, "As a result of the accident, I left my car in a state of confusion and got lost." She had no map. She had no compass. She had no functioning phone. She tried to orient herself by the sun heading west. She just lived in hope of finding a road or a house, or just one single other human being. Instead, she found 11 nights of freezing temperatures, of brutal mosquitoes, of thorny brush, and total isolation. At one point, she took shelter inside a small cave. She stayed alive by drinking water from puddles as well as rain. She ate what little food she'd grabbed before leaving the van, and she rationed her energy by moving only during the warmer parts of the day. Since she left without any shoes, she wrapped a scarf around her injured foot. She used her clothing to try and layer up against the nighttime cold, but she had no way of starting a fire and no blankets. The terrain scraped her skin raw. Her legs and arms were covered in welts from mosquito bites. In the darkness of the bush, Karolina was convinced that she wouldn't survive. She got to a point where she thought no one was coming. The words of Western Australia Police Acting Detective Inspector Jessica Sakuro. She continued, she is still in disbelief that she was able to survive.
Paint a picture, if you can, of the moment you had with her. What was her condition like? She was clearly, obviously, going to be very overwhelmed.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. She was very distressed, obviously exhausted, dehydrated, needed some food, but overall just relieved that she has come across someone and able to get that help. As we know in Western Australia, our outback area can be made of many terrains, which can be quite challenging. So often if you are out there, you may think, oh, I'm never going to come across someone who may help me. So, you know, we're very grateful that we found her.
Yeah, and I think over the years we've heard...
But what kept her moving, putting one foot in front of the other? It was the idea that someone might still be looking for her. And indeed, they were. In her official statement later, Karolina said, "The thought of all the people who believed in me, searched for me, and kept hoping for me, gave me the strength to carry on during my darkest moments." And amazingly, Karolina Vila's story is far from over. Within hours of being found, she was on a Western Australia police transport plane, headed for Perth. She walked up the steps of the aircraft with a visible limp, but amazingly, she did it on her own. Inside the Fiona Stanley Hospital, she was rehydrated, fed, and given medical treatments. And for the first time in 12 days, she was able to sleep in a bed. It's hard to imagine just how incredible that must have felt. Police confirmed that she'd survived 11 nights in the outback. She had only minor injuries along with severe hydration and, of course, emotional trauma. But she was alive and she will survive. "This is the best result we could have hoped for," said Acting Detective Inspector Jessica Sakuro. And everybody involved, from the police to the Premier to the farmer who stopped, called this what it was: a miracle, an incredible story of survival. Karolina Vila says she still plans to see Australia's east coast, but she'll never forget what Western Australia has taught her. "Previously, I didn't know where my place was, in a culture on the other side of the world," she said. "But now, I feel a part of it. Be careful out there, and I'll see you soon."